億の彼方そうさ僕たちは天使だった空の上から愛の種をまき散らしてこの星から悲しみ消したかった
Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff podcast and or Japanimation Station. Wherever you are listening today, I am Jonathan Lack.
And I'm Sean Chapman.
And we are here to remember the late, great Akira Toriyama, the creator of Dragon Ball and Dr. Slump, character designer on games like Chrono Trigger and the entire Dragon Quest series. On today's show, we are going to discuss his work and the impact it's had on our lives, read through some of the many statements that have poured in around the world on his passing, and respond to some listener questions on today's show, before playing a segment from our 10th anniversary episode where we ranked all the story arcs from Dragon Ball as a way just to celebrate the work itself in the present tense for fun. Before we get started, I thought I would just read the statement that Toriyama's Bird Studio released on Thursday night announcing his passing, and then, Sean, I will throw it over to you to give our first reactions. But this is the statement that Toriyama's studio released. To our fans and all those concerned, we are sorry for the suddenness of this announcement, but the cartoonist Akira Toriyama went to his eternal rest on March 1st, 2024, of an acute subdural hematoma. He was 68 years old. As he was enthusiastically involved in numerous undertakings with so many things he still wanted to do, we are filled with regret. That said, as a cartoonist, the deceased has left behind a large body of work. With the support of many people from around the world, he was able to continue his creative endeavors for over 45 years. It is our fervent wish that the inimitable world of Akira Toriyama's work will be loved by you all for many years to come. With gratitude for the kindness and friendship he showed us in life, we respectfully share this news. Further, funeral services were held with only close family members in attendance. In accordance with his own wish to keep things quiet, we ask that you not pay condolence visits or give condolence money, funerary offerings, or floral tributes. We also request that the media avoid such activities as interviewing family members. A remembrance ceremony at a later date is yet to be determined, but we will inform you as soon as a decision is made. We humbly ask you for your understanding at this difficult time. Bird Studio Inc., Capsule Corporation, Tokyo Inc., March 8th, 2024. So, Sean, this is big, devastating news. I'll let you take the first crack at it.
Yeah. So, over here, that news broke like Thursday night, because I very distinctly remember I was watching some episodes of Tamako Market, which is what we're currently prepping for our next recording for Japanimation Station. I was getting very near to the end of that season. I was like, you know what? I'm going to do a couple of more episodes tonight than I normally would, because there's obviously a school night. I get up at like 5:30 in the morning, so I don't usually stay up very late. And then I looked at Twitter and saw the news and was like, oh, shit. Obviously, I didn't finish those episodes of Tamako Market that night, because I just kind of sat around and ended up going to bed, because I think I saw the news at about 10 o'clock-ish, which is around when it broke. In our time zone, and then I ended up going to bed at like 11:30 or something, just sitting around thinking about it. Because like Akira Toriyama, and Dragon Ball very specifically, but obviously like other stuff like Dr. Slump and Dragon Quest. But Dragon Ball is the big one for me. Like that, Dragon Ball's just been a thing that's been in my life forever, for as long as I can remember, and it's such a kind of like fundamental work. And it's also still such a present work. And I think that's one of the things that like made the news so shocking, was this feeling of like, that Dragon Ball and Toriyama and like his work wasn't finished. He hasn't been doing like, creating a whole weekly manga series every week like Dragon Ball back in the old days, because, you don't need to put yourself through that anymore when you're at his level. But he was still so clearly very active in the production of new stuff, and they're doing the Dragon Ball Daima show, which he was involved in. And so that feeling of like after Battle of Gods coming out, and then Dragon Ball Super and all that stuff, where it just felt like Dragon Ball came back big, Toriyama's involvement was like in it. It's just Dragon Ball has felt very present and not like a thing that was old or done in any way. And so it just kind of has felt like, even though the main Dragon Ball series has been finished for a long time, like it really, like losing Toriyama feels like something has been taken away in a way that was just like very potent. And so, yeah, it took me a long, and I'm still like, feel like I'm processing the concept that he's not around anymore. But it like really, really hit me hard.
Yeah, I have a whole list in my outline of future projects that just from like in the next year we are expecting to see that are from or adjacent to him, and it's got 7 bullet points. So like, you're very right about that. Yeah, so it was Thursday night. I was coming home from a screening with a colleague of mine showing some of her work. And I got home and I parked in my garage, and I had gotten a notification on Twitter from someone. So I pulled up Twitter and I saw that notification, and then I kind of swiped over to the main page for a second, and that's where I saw it. And then I was just sitting in my car for like 10 minutes before I even kind of went inside. Because I was in a daze, you know? And I was all of that night and the next day and a little bit yesterday as well. Just, it was hard for me to focus on anything else. I spent Thursday night, I just kind of grabbed the nearest like Dragon Ball DVD I kind of had on hand. I just grabbed the first set of Dragon Ball Kai, and I put that in, and I was like, I'll watch a couple episodes of this because that's got Dragon Ball goodness in it, and I don't have to hook up my hard drive, which is where I've got all my like Z episodes and stuff. And I was doing that. I read through one of my favorite volumes of the manga, which is the fight between Piccolo Jr. and Goku at the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai. I've been reading through Jocko the Galactic Patrolman again. I've been looking through the various art books I have. Like, someone in one of the questions we got from a listener was like, is there any other celebrity death writ large, or like someone you have some kind of parasocial relationship with whose death has like hit you this hard? And there's really only one for me, and that was a long time ago now in 2011 when Clarence Clemens, the saxophonist of the E Street Band, Bruce Springsteen's band, died. And that hit me like an absolute ton of bricks. That band means a lot to me. His work specifically meant a lot to me. But the Toriyama thing is just, it's, you know, from my desk right here on this wall, I have 11 Dragon Ball posters. You know, I have another 12 out in the other room. I see his art every single day of my life. Every day. And I have for decades, you know, and I know that's the same for you too, Sean.
Yeah.
And it's just, and that's just Dragon Ball stuff. I mean, you know, his art is so omnipresent in so many places. He is someone who, I think part of why I think it's left a lot of us in a daze is that his impact is truly so vast and truly so irreducible that it's like hard to disentangle all of it. Like, even if you were to just focus on Dragon Ball, and you shouldn't, because Dragon Quest is also a massive legacy, and Dr. Slump would have been a legacy in and of itself if he never wrote another manga, because that was very popular. And, you know, there's all the other one-shots and offshoots of those things. But even if you just focus on Dragon Ball itself, like, I was trying to explain to someone who doesn't really follow anime or manga the other day why I was sad about this. And I said, it's very possible there is no human being who was more singularly responsible for the spread of anime and manga worldwide than Akira Toriyama because of Dragon Ball. Because Dragon Ball is and has always been the most popular one around the world. You know, there are other anime and manga that have had big presences in certain countries or in the East Asia sphere or something. Dragon Ball is the one where you can go anywhere and it is popular. And it is absolutely the one that broke open the floodgates, certainly in North America. And like, when you trace that legacy and how much has come out of, I think, that being the breakout, and then at home in Japan, inspiring just a massive amount of what we consider the modern kind of shonen anime manga landscape, from One Piece to just a million other things. It's a truly incalculable legacy. Like, you cannot account for it.
Yeah, because I do think, that's part of the thing that made the news like very difficult to process, is because you've never like needed to sit down and like consider the extent of his influence and his legacy. Yeah. Like, obviously it's obvious that it was tremendous, but it's like when you then are like really thinking about it and considering it, because now that he's not here anymore, it's just like there's no part of, I mean, there's really just kind of like no part of modern popular culture that's not touched by it, whether you're talking about anime or manga, because Dragon Ball is so popular that its influence has obviously spread outside the confines of manga and anime. And when you look at like, you know, modern superhero movies and their tendency to end with giant beams of light shooting up into the sky and all that kind of shit, you know, it's like so clear that's, not always directly. It's not always a one-to-one. The director was a fan of Dragon Ball, therefore they're depicting energy in the way that they're depicting it. But it is a no, that's how, the way that we visualize energy as a concept expressed in imagery and in movement in animation or cinema, it's Dragon Ball. Because if you go back to more classic American comic book influences, you're more getting stuff like the Jack Kirby energy crackle and stuff like that. That's not how that shit is represented on screen. It's always represented like it's a Kamehameha or like it's a Ki aura from Dragon Ball. And that's just one example, but there's a countless range of influences in terms of art and narrative pulled from Dragon Ball. And then obviously when you're looking at video games and stuff, Dragon Quest, which is just sort of, if you're talking about any kind of Japanese styled modern Western, a Japanese origin Western style fantasy. I don't know how the fuck you define that term. But that's just Dragon Quest, which means every single fantasy anime since the late 80s basically is just Dragon Quest aesthetic, because that's what it is. That's where it comes from. And then everything then influenced from that, right? And so that web of influence, it's so tremendous that it is I was trying to explain it also to people that in my life that don't really know much about it. I was it's kind of if when Picasso died. I don't know. It's here's a dude who effectively invented concepts behind how you visually represent things, and an art style that is so entrenched in the sort of that culture that it, Dragon Ball and Toriyama's art, broadly speaking, because not even Dragon Ball, because it's Dr. Slump obviously is where his art first became very popular. That changed the way that manga is drawn. It's just one of those things that his influence touched everything. And so it is, and because he had such a footprint in both the manga world, the anime world, and the video game world, it gives him a pretty uniquely widespread influence in modern popular culture.
Oh, yeah. So I wrote a whole chapter in my dissertation about the link between video games and anime. And that's that could be a whole book. That could be several books. There's a lot there. But it starts with Dragon Quest on some level, right? I know that's not the only one, but I feel the way video games are linked with anime aesthetically and somewhat narratively comes from Yuji Horii decision to get this guy from Shonen Jump before he was famous to come illustrate Dragon Quest and bring this manga aesthetic into it. And that has continued on through in so many ways, with Dragon Quest VIII on the PS2, the first one that was sort of 3D cell shaded, being a roadmap up to stuff like Genshin Impact now that uses an anime aesthetic. Mm-hmm. You can absolutely trace back to the Dragon Quest lineage. So that's the other thing is it is a transmedial legacy in a way that is also, so I feel the last death, I think, in the anime manga sphere that was this big in terms of influence was Osamu Tezuka. That's the last, and I feel there's a pretty direct line you can draw from one to the other in terms of their import and stature and impact they've left behind. It's just, it's insane. And as you say about his art, it's easy to take for granted because his art became so omnipresent, but there was no manga artist with a more distinctive style. There were others with maybe equally distinctive styles, but you can look at just the fucking head of hair on a character and know if it was Akira Toriyama. The way he drew everything was so unique to him, and even as his style evolved quite a bit over the years. Volume 1 Dragon Ball looks quite a bit different from Volume 42 Dragon Ball, but it is still Akira Toriyama. And up to his last completed manga, Jaco the Galactic Patrolman, it's as, identifiable as ever. And just an absolutely boundless creativity. Dragon Ball has a literally just endless supply of great characters. And again, it's just one of the things he did. I have the book, this was luckily published in English, Dragon Quest Illustrations. It's an art book of all his Dragon Quest work up through 10. It didn't, this was before 11 came out. And just one thing I noticed is, I opened to any page of this book and I have a smile on my face. Even Thursday night, I was very sad. I opened this book and just involuntarily was smiling looking at his monster designs. And it's just, you look through this and just decades of an inexhaustible supply of characters that are all identifiably Toriyama-esque, but none of them are the same. It's not like he's repeating or recycling designs. There's a bajillion monsters. This is always why Dragon Quest, to me, is at least one reason it's had a one-up on Final Fantasy, is Final Fantasy has never had an aesthetic for its monsters. Final Fantasy VII famously has you fight a fucking house at one point. Like, it's just kind of whatever they can throw at you. Dragon Quest has the greatest monsters in the history of video games, beginning with the slime, one of his most iconic designs, and just going on and on and on and on. And it's just that inexhaustibility that is amazing. Up to, this year, we're going to have Dragon Ball Daima with new designs he has. Dragon Quest 12 is in the works. I presume his work was done on that. That was announced years ago, and he would have been the first person to kind of finish the job on that. So who the heck knows? But just completely inexhaustible.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I mean, that's like one of his many, many, many incredible talents was, design. Because there are lots of different sorts of talents that go into being a mangaka. And it's why it's like, I think it's such a uniquely difficult sort of creative position. Yes. There's a reason why the vast majority of American comic books have the art and writing jobs split between at least two people. Because it's a lot to ask of one person to, one, design all of the characters and come up with their design, two, draw them, and then three, create the story, the dialogue, and the plotting, and all that kind of stuff, and doing all of that at the same time. And Toriyama was a master at all those different pieces, right? Because some artists, let's say Tite Kubo, who's the artist for Bleach, he is really, really good at character design, and he can make a million really cool looking characters, but he's not he's decent at manga paneling, but he's not the best at it. His manga paneling and that work and the actual drawings in the manga are good, but not always amazing. Or you might have, I can't think off the top of my head, but you'll obviously have other mangaka that might not have the most interesting character designs, but man, they are really fucking good at crafting the page and putting together the layouts and all that kind of stuff. And then you'll have other mangaka that maybe that side of it, say One, who's the guy who does One Punch Man, who is not a good artist, but is a great storyteller. And he can create the stories, and his art is kind of whatever, which is why it then gets remade later with a more...
He's good at the basics of the paneling that then gets built out into the full artistry of the manga that goes in Shonen Jump that's really beautiful and... Yeah.
But Toriyama does all of it, or he did all of it, right? He did all of it, and all of it was masterful. I mean, it's one of those things, we've parroted it multiple times on this podcast, but it really has to be emphasized. If you are a fan of Dragon Ball and you have not read the manga, you have to read the manga, because it's so good. It's the best version of Dragon Ball. I love all the things the anime brings with it, with the voice acting and the music and all that kind of stuff is amazing. But the manga is one of the best examples of sequential art, to break it out of just the manga bucket or whatever and say all comic books, all that, that style of storytelling. It's one of the best in the whole world, because he is so good at every single piece of it, whether it's making the monsters and the characters or the vehicles and the mecha and all of that stuff, the world design, the way that the world of Dragon Ball has this very clear sort of wuxia-inspired fantasy China look to it that obviously kind of evolves a bit over time. But then the plotting and the character writing and all that is also so excellent. And you see him in Dragon Ball, in the manga, cracking the nut of how do you tell this kind of action shonen story? And he has, you get to the Demon King Piccolo arc, which is where he figures it out. And he sort of figures out, here's the best way to tell the story. Here are the pieces that have to get put into place. And every major action shonen style manga has just been redoing the Demon King Piccolo plot arc since then.
Yes.
Including Dragon Ball, right? Dragon Ball just continues to iterate on and develop and find new ways to explore that framework. But the Demon King Piccolo thing is where that framework is developed. And whether you're talking about One Piece or Naruto or Bleach or My Hero Academia or Demon Slayer or Jujutsu Kaisen or Yu Yu Hakusho or whatever, all of them are just trying to find other ways to tell the Demon King Piccolo arc from the original Dragon Ball. And so that's one of the things about Toriyama's kind of unique genius, is that he was a genius at the top of his craft in all of the different kinds of things that go into being a mangaka.
This is so key because it is. I think Dragon Ball is just the most uncompromised version of its form you will ever find.
Yeah.
Right. Like it is. As he is like the literal goat at this thing, at the thing he did, which was shown in manga. There just isn't a better example of it in that totality, right? Like, and I have the same experiences. Like you mentioned some mangaka, like my comparison is Eiichiro Oda on One Piece, who I think is a phenomenal storyteller and world builder, and even better than Toriyama at certain things like I think character arcing and theme work and some stuff like that. But doesn't have the masterful paneling and things like that just carry you through. Where, like, I honestly think One Piece is, in many cases, better in its anime form. Dragon Ball, just, in many cases, I like what it did in the anime just as much, or I find it a wonderful alternative vision of it. But, like, the best scene in Dragon Ball Z anime is Gohan going Super Saiyan 2. That is as much as I think they ever fully, fleshed out a moment from the manga. It's also fucking perfect in the manga, right? Yeah. Like, you can't say one is better than the other. And it is just, I agree with you 100%. If people have not read the Dragon Ball manga, it is absolute magic. It has never been easier to find if you have the Shonen Jump app, or there's various fan translations, or what have you. It is out there. It is wonderful. It is as good as it literally gets. And, I was reading through it again the other night, my favorite fight in the series, which is Piccolo Jr. versus Goku at the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai, which is just, like, there are whole chapters in that have no dialogue, and it is just pure motion and kineticism and some sound effects, which also Toriyama was really good at layering in those katakana sound effects that look so good in manga. One thing I like slightly less about reading it in the official English is they replace those. And no, you should just leave those alone. They look great. They're part of the art. But anyway, the flow of it, Sean, like, I have never been able to read Toriyama manga slowly. I've never been able to, like, sit down and savor it because it's not asking you to. It just carries you along. It barrels you through the motion from one panel to the next. When I did stop and try to slow down and think about what makes it so great when I was reading that Piccolo fight, one thing I realized is there's not that many panels or motion in here. He uses big panels. He often fills pages. The panels are very, he was famous for this. They are so clear. They are never, ever, ever cluttered. They are so legible. And it'll just be, within a chapter, a couple of blows, a couple of motions. But you get this sense that, like, you forget you're in a body sitting in a chair reading a manga and you are just carried through it like a bullet. And I don't even know if I can fully break down what that quality is, but it is, I think, in some sense, singular to him in how much I feel it while reading.
Yeah, I think there's, like, in terms of when I think about, his work as like a comic artist or whatever, a sequential artist, a lot of things jump out to me about his work that's so phenomenal. And some of it is it harkens to, in an American context, a lot of the classic Silver Age comic artists like a Jack Kirby. Obviously, Kirby goes back to the Golden Age as well. I think specifically his work at Marvel with, like, Fantastic Four and Incredible Hulk. Then also you have Steve Ditko, obviously, who's like Spider-Man, the original Spider-Man comics. And there's the clarity of movement and of a continuity of action between panels that a lot of those artists were also particularly really good at. And there's a concept in, when you're talking about sequential art, you're talking about, like, a kind of compression of time, of how compressed or decompressed is the artwork in terms of how much time is expressed in each individual image or each individual panel, right? And so if you have something that's hugely decompressed, we've talked about this on the podcast before, but you have something that's hugely decompressed, you might spend an entire page showing the very detailed movement of someone picking up a cup of coffee off of a table and have, like, a whole 3x3 grid showing every single process of that movement of someone picking up that cup of coffee and bringing it to their mouth or something. Or you can have, like, two panels, one that shows the coffee cup on the table, the next one shows the person drinking the coffee cup. And that would be, much more sort of compressed of a time flow. Or you could have something that's just like, we are, like, really compressing it and you just don't even show that action at all. Like, it's just the dude drinking a cup of coffee in the next panel because whatever, we're not concerned with showing that process or that flow of action. And I think it's a really sort of, like, delicate balance that artists need to find in terms of where do you draw that line of like what actions are important, what actions do you decompress, what actions do you compress. And I tend to find like lots of artists are on one side or the other. Either their stuff is too decompressed and it's just so like slow and kind of pondering and you just spend too much time on the images, or it's too heavily compressed. And this is a problem I think a lot of manga sometimes has, where it becomes very difficult to follow because the image is too cluttered. It's trying to show too much at once in one image. And it just becomes like a little kind of gobbledygook because it's not decompressing the timeline enough for you to see all the pieces that go into the movement of the action. And Toriyama was just like, there's no point at which he didn't find that kind of Goldilocks zone. Every single time, every single page, it's so perfectly laid out. Every action is so clearly thought through, and the exact right number of panels are selected to express that action. And so there's a purity to the movement, and there's a purity to the sequencing of art. And there's really, I'm not like an absolute expert on this stuff. There are obviously lots of people who have read a lot more manga and comic books than me. But in my experience of the stuff I've read, I've only read one thing that is as good as what Toriyama's work on Dragon Ball is at that specific thing, and that's Katsuhiro Otomo's Akira. Like Akira, if you have not read that manga, people absolutely need to read it because it is incredible. And Otomo is like the other artists I've seen that every single page, it's the perfect number of panels. Every panel is the perfect size, and what is in those panels is the absolute perfect amount of information it needs with the perfect clarity that information demands. And it's just such a rare, unique skill. And especially where manga is so action focused compared to like a lot of American comic books, you really need that skill to express the story and express the movement of the characters and all that kind of stuff. And Toriyama's like, he was the best. Like, I mean, there's just, it's hard to define just how exceptional he was at that stuff unless you have read the manga. It's like people have to read the manga and like really appreciate that skill because it's out of this world.
It is out of this world. It's, you flip through the pages of anything he wrote and you just get this sense that this guy spoke comics. Like it's a language that he, and to some degree he alone, was fully fluent at, and he is sharing with you. And, you flip through these and there's no standardization to it either. He is so varied in how he uses every page. And he has some things that, I think are common techniques. Like, again, he does not generally use small panels or overload a page with like more than 4 or 5 or 6. But it's just amazing. And it is the gold standard of this kind of thing for me. And the other thing to say when we talk about how singularly he is, he did it all with one assistant. That is one of my favorite anecdotes about Akira Toriyama, because it is pretty, while manga is definitely like, done by generally one person at the top, you often, for the popular stuff, and certainly something that comes out weekly, they will have a team of assistants who are doing some things to help with backgrounds or inking or lettering or any of those things, right?
Yeah.
Eiichiro Oda has a whole little studio. He does all the basics, he does the layouts, he does the characters, but other people fill in a lot of the extra work, which is understandable because he's been doing it for 30 years and has a chapter every week, right? Toriyama, through Dr. Slump and Dragon Ball, which were just a continuous run for like 15 years there or something, he had one assistant who would come over. I remember this anecdote because he explains it in one of the volumes, who would come over on Thursdays, and Toriyama would have ready for him the things he needed him to do, and they would do that and then go home. And it was just one day a week, and one other person would help with it. And like, for a series of this scale and like longevity and all of that is just crazy. And also speaks to, I think he also knew what his comics didn't need, right? Like, he would say this in a very self-deprecating way, that like he liked to set all his fights in like big canyons or things like that, so he didn't have to draw a lot of background detail. And he would say that in a very funny, self-deprecating way. But like, there's a really smart logic to that, which is that you focus on the motion, you focus on the characters, you focus on the things that actually matter, and you're not overloading the panels with unnecessary background information, which is often where I think you get the mangaka handing off to assistants and having them kind of overload it. it with extra effects. Like, I love the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga by Kazuki Takahashi, and I think it's masterful in a lot of ways. One thing I don't love about it is I do think it is overloaded sometimes with detail in the frames. I think it has too much of the different kind of, I forget what you call these, but like the texturing effects you put on things to kind of add more texture to the drawings. And there's all sorts of like effects that you can do in manga like that. And Toriyama just used none of that. And it was just very basic. He drew it, finished it, didn't overload it. It does feel like it's coming from one hand, basically, whenever you're looking at it. It'll have your kind of light, emptier backgrounds, and that often works really, really effectively. And it just, again, it's that, as you say, it's that balance. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. It is the Goldilocks just right.
Yeah, and I think like it's such a good point about the backgrounds, that yes, they're always in some sort of weird field or in a rocky canyon or on like, just the empty random like, plains of Namek or wherever
Yes.
they're at. And yet, like, those locations are kind of iconic,
Yes.
because they tended to still have a very distinctive geography to them. Obviously, you also have the tournaments, which, hey, let's have just a big square with a bunch of other squares in them. And there you go. That's all you need. And just kind of like a little bit of an audience in the background in some of the shots. But like they're also, one thing I love is that they're always like very kind of like bright and open, and like there's so much kind of space there, because that's something that happens, I think, is a bad habit of a lot of these kinds of stories, is ending up putting a lot of these sequences in really tight, small, dark, cramped spaces, like they're in some underground cave or something like that. That also tends to give you this kind of like overloaded visual information where there's not enough contrast in the image. And so, no, like, let's go fly out to some big, weird, rocky canyon with a big pillar for Vegeta to stand on and a slightly smaller pillar for Goku to stand on. And this is where we're going to have a fight. And it's nice and open. There's a big, clear, empty horizon that you can draw. And it allows that some of that clarity. And you don't have to sort of stuff characters into a weird cave or wherever the fuck they're going to be. There's a utilitarianism to his art. Obviously, there's the famous anecdote of, one of the driving motivations behind Super Saiyan being what it is to not have to color in and ink in Goku's hair anymore, which is like perfect, genius. Yes, like let's have a thing that's cool and also fulfills a very clear purpose. And Toriyama like was a man who had no ego about that shit, and he would just like openly like admit it and put it, and he would put it and have his little like avatar with the gas mask or whatever tell you that at the end of one of the pages, like, yeah, this is why. It's like, I'm tired of drawing that damn tail anymore. Like, let's just get rid of it. And there's a beauty and a simplicity to that like an honestness and an earnestness to that a lot of creators could learn from. Because there's just fuck it. Like, yeah, I don't want to have me or my assistant color that hair in anymore during these like very elaborate fight scenes. So it's just going to be blonde now. Here we go.
Yep. And in so doing, created one of the most iconic character designs of all time, right? It's just crazy. Even when he's trying to be lazier, he just can't help it. He makes history. Oh, I love it so much. I mean, okay, so Sean, backing up, we've told these stories on the podcast before, but just to have them in one place, what's your history with Dragon Ball? And Toriyama, like, where does it start? How does it extend? I know this could be several podcasts worth of stories for both of us, but just the basics.
Yeah, I mean, the simple version of it is that, like, I don't know when I started, like, when I was first exposed to it, because it was so early that I don't know. I can't remember. Yeah. Like, as far as my experience is concerned, Dragon Ball is just like a thing that has always existed. It's obviously true in the sense of that it happened before I was born. Yeah. But also I encountered it at such a young age. And, when I grew up, like, my favorite thing on TV was Toonami. And so I just was obsessive about trying to watch every episode when it came on. Obviously we're talking Toonami, so I grew up with the English dub and watched that obsessively and played all the games that came out. So some of my favorite games as a little kid were things like Legendary Super Warriors on the Game Boy Color and the Legacy of Goku games. Well, Legacy of Goku 2 and 3, Legacy of Goku 1 is kind of a crock of shit. That's a game that was like bad, and when I was a kid I knew it was bad. That's how bad that game was. But then obviously you have like Dragon Ball Z Budokai, you had the Budokai Tenkaichi games, which I'm very excited for the new one, the Sparking one, to come out, which that'll be nice to have another one of those games out. And then as I grew older, eventually getting into college, that's when I watched Dragon Ball Kai. And because that, like the English version of Kai, because that's when that came out. And I was like, it had been, at that point, it had been a while since I had watched Dragon Ball, and watching Kai and really enjoying that, because I think, especially from an English dub perspective, that was like a really important thing to do, to say, let's kind of redo a lot of these big moments with like a better English cast for some characters that were recast, like Frieza, and then also giving some of like the old people who had been around since the Funimation days, when you had that switch over with the Funimation people, giving them another crack at like a better script and they're better actors and stuff like that. And watching that was really big to me, and that's around the time that I started doing Japanese. And so then I started watching original Dragon Ball through, all the way through to the end of Dragon Ball Z in Japanese. With a couple of small exceptions, I skipped the Garlic Jr. arc. I haven't seen all the Garlic Jr. saga since I was like 10 or something. So I skipped that. I tried watching GT, and I tapped out of GT before I even got to Super Saiyan 4, because I was like, I just couldn't do it. It's like I was good on that. But I watched all like the classic stuff, because I had always had that difficulty with just switching straight to the Japanese voices, because Goku's voice is obviously so different, with it being Masako Nozawa versus Sean Schemmel, and it's just like, having a woman versus man play the character is like a huge shift. And so that shift is very easy to go along with if you start with Goku as a kid and you don't have kind of that culture shock of like the voice quality being so different. But if you just follow along naturally, you see the progression of the voice, and you see how Masako Nozawa like alters the performance as Goku gets older and older and older, and now it's like the only voice of Goku I can really accept. And then that is also around the time when I got good enough at reading Japanese that they started putting out in Japan those really nice versions of the manga on like, proper like Shonen Jump magazine style, like big pages and stuff.
They were called the Legend releases.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're amazing, and they're so good. And so I started importing those from Japan and then reading those in Japanese. And that was the first thing I ever read in Japanese, which it was helpful because there's not a huge amount of writing in Dragon Ball, certainly compared to some other manga. And you have
it's all the Death Note.
Yeah, so it's not Death Note. You don't have like a page where it's like you have a little tiny face of a guy in the middle of the panel, and then he's just surrounded by text bubbles, which every once in a while you'll get some of those. And then all the kanji are very simple. There's furigana, or like they kind of tell you how to read the kanji for the ones that are a little bit harder. And there's just like, it's a lot of like action and movement. And so that was like a big step for me in getting better at reading reading Japanese, was reading it through Dragon Ball, and kind of, that's one of the things about engaging in a language, is that first one thing is like a huge jump. Like it's a big hurdle. It was like that and Persona 5 for me were really big for me, trying to like kind of get over that hurdle into a level where I could actually kind of use the language more naturally and actually engage in it in that way. So, that was really huge. And then now becoming a teacher, I talked about this on Twitter a little bit. Like one of the things I think that makes Toriyama's loss hit so hard for me is that I see his art every day, but not just because of like a poster that I have, but because it's like the shirt that my students are wearing, or they're playing Dragon Ball Legends on their phone at lunch, or they're doodling. I did have a whole thing on Twitter where I talked about, when I was a little kid, I would doodle Super Saiyan hair in my notebook and shit like that. And now when I collect work from students, I see the same kinds of doodles on their homework. And it's one of those things about Dragon Ball that you see just how enduring the legacy and influence is, that it's still like the most popular one of those. Obviously, they really like Demon Slayer. They really like Jujutsu Kaisen. They really like Naruto and One Piece are still popular. Bleach you get a little bit less of, but you still see people who are into Bleach, or like a Bleach t-shirt on a student. My Hero Academia is quite popular. My Hero Academia is probably actually the most popular of the modern current ones, at least among the clientele at my school. But Dragon Ball is at the top. Like, it is absolutely, if you're seeing an anime or manga t-shirt, it is most likely going to be a Dragon Ball one. If you see them playing a game on their phone, it's going to be a Dragon Ball game. If you see a doodle in their notebook, it's going to be a Dragon Ball based doodle. Like, it's still the most popular one, and particularly with students who are Hispanic or Black. Like which is a lot of, at the school I work at, that's the majority of my students. And so it is a thing that for me is like a lingua franca, right? It's like this common tongue we all speak, that there's a huge cultural divide between me and a Hispanic 15-year-old boy. In most regards, their life is very different than my life was at their age, or certainly my life is now. But we both love a Kamehameha, right? And it's like, that is a thing that has allowed me to connect with lots and lots and lots of students. And so it is that thing where, Dragon Ball is just sort of like an ever-present thing in my life. And it is a thing I think of all the time. Whenever I'm like outside and a huge gust of wind comes by, there's at least one brain cell in the back of my head that's like, yes, it's like, my energy is flowing out of my, you feel your hair like just shoot up. You're like, yes, now my time is here. Finally it's here. I'm going to be Super Saiyan. It is, it's that kind of just like thing that is just baked into my DNA at this point. And I do think like learning Japanese was in no small part because I had a desire to read Dragon Ball in Japanese and to make the jump. It was a thing I'd always wanted to watch Dragon Ball in Japanese. It was just difficult for me because of that. I was so used to the English voices that even when I had moved on to Japanese for everything else, it was hard for me to make that jump. And so that's just like, it's obviously like Dragon Ball is a thing that has changed my life very clearly. Yeah. So I guess that's my short/long answer.
So mine's similar in some ways and different in others. I was not a Toonami kid for whatever reason. I just didn't watch a lot of Toonami. I was more on kind of the kids WB train or things like that. I watched a lot of Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And some of that stuff. And so Yu-Gi-Oh! Was one of my entry drugs for manga and anime as a kid. And I had seen Dragon Ball around. I'd seen it at friends' houses. You couldn't escape it when we were kids. Yeah, just for reference, Sean and I are both born in 1992. Dragon Ball comes on the air in the U.S. in its original dub form in 1996. The dub we were familiar with was like the 1999 Season 3 Funimation recast with Sean Schemmel and Chris Sabat and everyone that got really big in the U.S. But anyway, so it was inescapable, but I just wasn't that into it. And then I started reading Shonen Jump, the monthly Shonen Jump that Viz started putting out here in, I think, 2003. And I remember very specifically, and I still have the issue because it has meant so much to me. I got this in the mail back. See, kids, once upon a time, there were these things called magazines, and they came in the mail every month. And anyway, I had that. An
actual physical mail. It wasn't an email. It wasn't one of those electronic mails. Not that newfangled shit. They put it on the back of a horse, and they rode it up to your house, and they rang your bell, and they brought it along with your milk. I mean, this is just how it worked back in the day.
Anyway, yes. So I would get these every month, and this I have with me. This is the August 2004 issue, Shonen Jump, American Shonen Jump number 20. It has Shaman King Boy on the front. I've never learned his name. I do know his name because it says Yo right here.
Yes,
on
his
name
is Yo, and he has a weed leaf. It's a whole thing.
But no, I read Shonen Jump for Yu-Gi-Oh! At first, but this is also how I got into One Piece and several other things. But this month, so this was August, so it actually came out in like late June, because that's how magazines are numbered and they're weird. But we had our annual summer fishing trip that I went on with my dad. My little brother wasn't old enough to go yet. He started going the following year. But so this was 2004, so I would have been 11 in summer of 2004. And I had this along with me for that trip, because back then we didn't have e-readers and tablets where you could, I'm going to download all of One Piece to my tablet for this trip. No, you couldn't do that. You could bring a couple of books at most. But I had this on that trip. It was like a week-long trip. We drove up to Canada. We were there in the cabin fishing for a few days, and this was one of the things I brought with me. And because it was one of the only things I had to read, I read the Yu-Gi-Oh! Chapters in here several times, and this is the part of Yu-Gi-Oh! Where they are playing the tabletop RPG with Bakura. This is the best part of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga. It's really cool. But, I didn't just want to read that, so I wound up reading all the manga in here several times, including Dragon Ball. And this is the chapters. This is chapter, as Viz numbers it, 196 of DBZ. It is the one, it has one of my favorite Toriyama covers ever, where it is Cell standing on top the planet Earth as he is starting the Cell games. But this is where Cell announces the Cell games, and Goku and Gohan come out of the Room of Spirit and Time after training for them a year, for everyone else a day. And there's that one of my favorite pages in all Dragon Ball, where Goku and Gohan come out. It's a full page just showing their whole bodies, and their, armor is kind of tattered, but they're coming out as Super Saiyans. And that is new, because usually you would turn that off and on, but Goku has figured out how to keep it on all the time. And there were, I think, 4 Dragon Ball chapters in this one. It goes on through the part where Cell fucks up the army while he's waiting for the Cell games to start, and then is where Goku goes to Namek and gets Dende to be the new god of Earth. And so those were the chapters, and that week I read those several times, and I was like, this is super cool. And I started following Dragon Ball. I started reading it from this point, picking up some of the graphic novels and continuing to read it in Weekly Jump. I went back to the issues I already had of Weekly Jump to kind of see what I was catching up on. And, one thing I got to stress with Dragon Ball is that one of the things that has made its longevity amazing is that the market was so different back then. And most of the manga and anime that got big back then are not still big in America today in the same way, right? Like, Pokemon is ever present, but Pokemon kind of transcends a lot of things. But, Yu-Gi-Oh! Does not have the same crossover cultural appeal that it did back then. If I make Yu-Gi-Oh! Jokes with my students, they don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I think there are people who have still a lot of affection for it, but, the various Yu-Gi-Oh! Spin-offs do not have the level of merchandising they once did in the US.
I have never seen a Yu-Gi-Oh card from one of my students. That has not happened. I'll get a couple of for the ones that are particularly nerdy, they'll do Magic the Gathering, but that's it in terms of trading card games. So yes, the Yu-Gi-Oh, I love it, but it has not been passed on to the new generation.
Right. And times change, right?
Yes.
But distribution of anime was so different. So part of it for me was, and this is something I loved about Dragon Ball back then, is I read and experienced the entire fucking thing out of order. And I think a lot of us did. I mean, we had to, because Z was the thing that was distributed, not original Dragon Ball, at least at first. Eventually, Funimation put out that anime. Eventually, they put out that manga, Viz did. But Z was always the priority here in the United States. And so we were getting it all out of order, and I started with the Cell games, and Toriyama is such a good storyteller, you can do that. Just jump in and you'll have fun, kind of anywhere. You will get it. It's iconographic, it's big, it's solid. And part of the fun for me was piecing it together. And the Cell games was kind of my big entry point, and that was my number one ground zero with Dragon Ball, and I would kind of go before and after that, eventually to the beginning of Z with the Saiyan arc. Later on, the Boo stuff was published in the sequential graphic novels, and that's how I read it the first time. I was very much manga first with Dragon Ball in all of this, and then I remember I didn't have the money to get all the books, so my library had a bunch of the original Dragon Ball manga, those 16 volumes, and I would rent those out and see that. But I would collect it all kind of out of order. I would see bits and pieces of the anime here and there, and part of that kind of, this is, I think, very alien to people today. No one sits down and starts One Piece with Punk Hazard and figures out before and after. It's a sequential thing for people now. But, that was part of the fun of big series like Dragon Ball back in the day, and you would talk with your friends at recess, so who is this Frieza guy anyway? And they would be like, well, let me tell you, he's the, king of the universe and all this stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's especially because with Dragon Ball, it's so weird because it was all done in Japan by the time it became big over here. And so it's you would have things I had a friend, Kenji, who was from Japan, his family was, right? He was born over here. But he had family that still lived in Japan. And so every once in a while he would have oh, here's this weird bootleg ass PS1 Dragon Ball game. I guess it wouldn't have been bootleg, but from the perspective of a kid over here, it's where the fuck did this weird Japanese Dragon Ball PS1 game come from? You had particularly weird shit, they did put out officially the Dragon Ball GT Final Bout. That's PS1 fighting game over here. Even
before GT was released, way before we got the GT anime. Yeah,
and it's a different voice cast, and all this is so fucking weird. But you had a lot of stuff like that, or you just see images online when you got on the computer at school, because at that point my house didn't have good internet yet. Of oh my god, what's this Super Saiyan 4? What the hell? Yes. The first time I experienced the majority of the Majin Buu arc was in the legendary Super Warriors Game Boy Color game, because it hadn't hadn't come out yet over here. At least not all of it was at that point. And so there's like, I remember that's where I found out how Kid Boop lost when the Spirit Bomb and all that was playing that game. And yeah,
have I told the story? Sorry. Have I told the story that I must be one of the only people on Earth who was tricked by the fake Namek arc? When I saw that aired.
I think you talked about it before, but yes.
Which, like, again, I know today this sounds inconceivable, but I didn't know. Like, I don't know if I hadn't, and I don't remember the exact order, but maybe I hadn't read that part of the manga yet or whatever, or maybe I thought the anime was changing things up. I'm like, this isn't exactly how Namek started in the manga, but, you know, it looks like Namek. But those couple of episodes, when they aired on TV or whatever, I saw, or re-aired or whatever, right? I saw those and there was cool. I'm like, this isn't exactly like I remember it. What's going on with Namek? I guess the anime made some changes. And I'm like, oh no, this is filler. This is really crass filler for like 4 weeks with the fake Namek arc. One of the worst pieces of filler ever. But I always have had a little bit of affection for it because it tricked me for a couple of weeks there.
Yeah, because it's just like, you know, all this information was not widely distributed.
Yes.
It you know, it was all kind of like, you know, a friend of a friend's uncle told someone this thing. And you just sort of like, you know, whatever, however you came at it, Dragon Ball was this weird artifact that like it somehow existed out there in its entirety, but you couldn't get it. And so it's like you just sort of like patchworked, pieced it together because, you know, the chances of a kid having watched all of it from the beginning of Z initially was very slim. So it's like everyone picked it up at some point along the way. And then even if then, you know, you've got like Krillin and Tien and Yamcha, these characters that are huge in the original Dragon Ball, other than Krillin, not so important in Dragon Ball Z. And so you have all this like, who are these people? Like, what is their relationship? Like, you can tell that there's a much bigger story here that you haven't experienced. And so, yeah, that was a very like weird kind of media property that you just kind of got in bits and pieces here and there. I think partially because the perspective from like Western animated shows was that there was effectively no narrative continuity with those sorts of things. And so I don't think the companies that brought it out over here had the like notion of like, it's a story and you have to tell the whole story from beginning to end. And like, there's characters and there are arcs and there's a larger thing here. And so like, it just came out in this like weird scattershot way.
Well,
but the brilliance of Toriyama's storytelling is that doesn't matter that much. You can pick it up wherever. You could pick it up at like Goku fighting Vegeta and just say like, yeah, like the storytelling is so clear and the characters are so iconic in this way that they just jump off the page. That's like, you could just pick it up wherever. Or like you could miss an episode because, you know, your parents made you go to fucking soccer practice or whatever shit they made me do when I was a kid instead of being able to watch Dragon Ball Z on Friday nights. And I remember distinctly missing like multiple years in a row it lining up where I did not see the episode where Gohan and Krillin fight fucking Guldo in the Ginyu Force. I just missed that episode over and over again because it always lined up with some game or some shit that I had to go do or my brother did, and so I had to get dragged along with it. It's like, god damn it, I want to see. I only knew what happened to Guldo because it happened in the previous episode recap thing. But you could skip an episode or a couple of episodes and you could still follow along with it because that's how clear the storytelling is.
Absolutely. And, you know, for me, the other half of this is once I started getting into Dragon Ball, then it was getting into the anime too. And at that point, a lot of it had aired in the US. So I'm not going to do the thing holier than thou. I never liked the dub. But I never got into it to the level a lot of kids my age did, right? Like, I never had that association with Sean Schemmel that you did, for instance, that made it hard to get into the Japanese. Because what I would do is I would pick up or rent or whatever some of the DVDs from the Cell games where I knew stuff. I remember very vividly the first DVD I ever got from Dragon Ball was the Funimation volume called Sacrifice, and it's the one where Goku dies getting Cell off of Earth when he's going to explode. And I saw those 4 episodes. And again, back then, you get a DVD like that, they would have 3 to 4 episodes, and this was, you know, at the point where finally you had them in both English and Japanese. And because you only had those 4 episodes, I would first just play it default in English, and that's how it played. But then it was like, well, I want to watch these episodes again, and I see it has this Japanese option. It's on the packaging. They're bragging about it. I should see what that's like. And I remember just really falling in love with the Japanese cast. And whenever I would get a DVD or a movie or any of that stuff, I would watch it both ways. I would watch it in English, and then I would watch it in Japanese subtitled. And I absolutely credit that with getting me interested in like foreign cinema, basically, and getting me interested in watching stuff with subtitles and listening to other languages, and Japanese in particular. Like, I learned all the honorifics from Dragon Ball because Steve Simmons, who did the subtitles at Funimation, did a great job. He was basically a fan subber before he did it officially, and he just left all the honorifics intact. He would always do that. He wouldn't like replace it with Mr. or Lord or anything like that. He would keep San and Sama and Chan and all of those, and I would just learn those by osmosis, and that was one of the things that got me fascinated in Japanese as a language. And so I always loved that. And, you know, I would watch the English dub if I had to, because you couldn't be too picky back then. Like when they started airing, when Funimation went back and did English seasons 1 and 2 again, which is the Saiyan arc and the first half of Namek, redubbing it with the new Funimation cast. They started that in 2005. Those all aired on Adult Swim, so they could be uncut at night. And they aired at like 2 in the morning, but we had one of those VHS recorders where we sound so old. You could put in the tape and you would time it and say, hey, tape player, turn on and record the TV at 12:30 a.m. And then the next morning when I was getting ready for school, I would watch the episode from the night before, and that's how I watched the Saiyan arc and a bunch of the Frieza stuff. So I absorbed a lot of the dub back in those days, but then I was very excited when they started putting those out on DVD. I could watch them in Japanese because I just kind of loved going back and forth and hearing the differences and all of that. And it's you know, I said this on Twitter the other night, trying to put into words the Toriyama of it all. I just wouldn't be the same person without this stuff. It got me into anime. It got me into the Japanese language. You know, it was absolutely the drug that then opened up, you know, my fascination with Studio Ghibli and other anime and all the academic work I do. Like, you can just trace a very direct line, and I have no idea who I would be without the love of manga and of anime in Japanese and the curiosity that Dragon Ball sparked over and over. And I know that there are literally millions of people who can say that.
Yes, around the entire planet too, because it's like it's so, and like a lot of them, you know, a lot of places like in Europe and in Central and South America got it earlier than us, and so like, you know, there's an even older generation of fans that can associate it with that if you were in those places as well. This is very cool. But yeah, it is. I have to echo that of like, I do not know, you know, what my life would be like without encountering Dragon Ball, because, you know, I liked a lot of the other Toonami shows. You know, I particularly really liked stuff like Yu Yu Hakusho and Rurouni Kenshin and some of the other stuff that was on there. But Dragon Ball was always at a different level. You know, there's like Dragon Ball was up there at the top, and then everything else was a couple of like, you know, pillars lower. Even if they're very, very good, Dragon Ball was the fucking thing, because everybody liked Dragon Ball. Who liked any of that stuff. Like, you know, some, you know, people maybe was like, Yu Yu Hakusho is not my favorite thing. Maybe this person's a little bit more into Yu-Gi-Oh! Or whatever. They like picking your different kind of anime that became popular over there. But if you were into any anime, you were into Dragon Ball. And it's like, it was, you know, this sort of, it truly was a common denominator. And so there is this sense of community around Dragon Ball as a property that I think is really powerful and just like transcends everything. And it is just like, whether you're Japanese or you're American or you're Mexican or Brazilian or French or whatever, you know, it is this thing that kind of like unites people. And I remember distinctly when, you know, we're thinking about Dragon Ball and our legacy with it, you know, when it kind of came back with Battle of Gods, and then like that sort of like the resurgence that happened, that sense of like, that community being like reignited, and seeing, you know, it's now a thing that we can kind of take for granted to a certain extent, this notion of getting like the Kimetsu no Yaiba last episode of the last season, yes, and the first episode of the new season being in the movie theaters and that making money. Well, it's like Battle of Gods coming out over here, like that was, as far as my memory goes, like the beginning of that trend of where it's like, oh, it's back, like we have something in the theaters, there's a recognition. It was small scale for that one, but it was like, oh, this is like a thing. And then Resurrection of F was bigger, and then Dragon Ball Super Broly was fucking huge. It was just this sense of momentum there.
Well, and it was kind of concomitant with the rise of like the simulcasting and streaming and the Crunchyroll of it all, right? But like Dragon Ball absolutely was at the front of that spear, and it's a fascinating history because I remember this so vividly. Battle of Gods, it took us forever to get it. It was a year later when America, because Toei for so long didn't know what to do with Dragon Ball, even as everything else. Like they were simulcasting One Piece. They were on it with other stuff, but with Dragon Ball, like I think people forget, Super didn't simulcast until the Future Trunks arc. It took a full half of that show before they even figured out the licensing for it, because it's Dragon Ball and it's weird and it's different, right? But Battle of Gods had a one-night Fathom event screening in America when it came out here. So it was a one-night thing, and I think, you know, people have to remember when Dragon Ball was first big, there actually were theatrical screenings of anime. Pokemon, the first movie, made a shit ton of money, right? And there were other things like that. Yu-Gi-Oh! Got a movie. Dragon Ball did have, I remember this, I was in... we were in LA. We were not in LA. We were south of LA, but we were in California with my family on a trip when they did a screening. I think this was 2006 of movies 6 and 12. They did Return of Cooler and Fusion Reborn as a linked package in theaters. And I got my mom and dad to drive me and my brother to some random theater in LA so we could go see that on our trip, because that was the one night they did it. So it had happened before, but like there had been this lull, I think, from when kind of the collapse of kind of the Toonami era through to the start of the Crunchyroll era, where anime was much more niche in the US, right? And it was a thing that survived kind of in fan subs and in some official releases, but it wasn't big the way it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, or the way it is now. And then Battle of Gods comes out in this era where it's starting to get big again, but like it hadn't kind of broached the theatrical mainstream wall yet. And I remember how much they underestimated that Fathom event screening of Battle of Gods, because I went to it. It was an English dub screening. It wasn't even that good quality. It was like, I think, streamed over satellite. It looked like shit. But people were so excited. It was not just a sold out screening that I was in, and this was at a normal big multiplex movie theater. It was so sold out that they oversold it, and there were people streaming in, just sitting in the aisles, on the staircases, standing in between rows to watch the movie. I've never seen that. I've never seen that with another screening ever. The demand was so high. And then Resurrection F had, I think, 2 weeks of screenings, again in English, but at limited releases. And it was big. And then Dragon Ball Super Broly is the one that kind of ripped open the lid and said, we're just doing a normal wide theatrical release. And then since then, you have had stuff like Mugen Train and Jujutsu Kaisen Zero and the My Hero Academia movies and some other stuff. The One Piece Film Red, where Crunchyroll Films through Sony has just done normal wide releases. And then finally with Dragon Ball Super Superhero, we had that where they also showed it in Japanese in theaters. And I think so you can kind of trace the reawakening of anime as a mainstream thing in the US, bigger than ever before, through Dragon Ball's reawakening as well.
Yeah, there's just like, it's that thing where it just has been kind of like the beating heart of anime worldwide in many ways. It's like it has heralded so much with like the shifts of the market.
It's amazing. Do you want to talk a little bit about his other numerous contributions and any of those that you have love for? I mean, we could go on all day, but like Dragon Quest is, I think, the other biggest pillar of his legacy worldwide. You know, and obviously Dragon Quest is not his sole invention. He is the character designer. Yuji Horii did the game design. You have the music
Koichi
by
Sugiyama.
Koichi Sugiyama, which it is brutally sad to me now that there's only one of those three left. It's Yuji Horii. The other two are gone. It sucks. But, you know, Dragon Quest is the progenitor of the JRPG. Mm-hmm. You and I got into it obviously much later than Dragon Ball. I think a lot of people did because Dragon Quest didn't quite have the same hold over here. But you and I played 11 and loved it. I know I've played 1 through 4 of the original run. I think you've played those too.
I've played 1 through 3. I've not gotten on to 4 yet.
Not gotten 4. But we love these games, and so much of it is Toriyama's art. It's so singular.
Yeah, I mean, it's playing Dragon Quest 1 was a real, like, scales fall from my eyes kind of moment for me of, like, it sort of made me realize, oh, this is what JRPGs are. And like it put into perspective like why I've never really connected with the Final Fantasy series as a whole. Like there are individual Final Fantasies that I like, but the franchise as a whole has always been kind of like elusive to me. It was like why playing Dragon Quest 1 is like, oh, this is what a JRPG is. And this is like, and the things that I like about modern JRPGs really just harken back to this first game that is, Dragon Quest 1 is exceedingly simple, but its simplicity is what exposes the fundamental like gameplay design of a JRPG, and that it's just, you're going out, you're sort of wandering out into the world, fighting some monsters, getting some experience, getting as far as you can get, having to go back, buy new equipment, get some like herbs and stuff like that, gear up for your journey again. You can go out a little bit farther, getting more powerful each time as you kind of unwrap this whole wider world the game is set in and leveling up your character. And absolutely, I think like the secret sauce of Dragon Quest is Toriyama's art. Like the game would be great if it was just like that fundamental game design, because the game design is so strong in Dragon Quest 1. But the aesthetic of everything is incredibly potent, and it gives it such a distinctive flavor. And it's also like it's the art in the game, which is phenomenal, but it's also we'd have to kind of replicate this experience as best as you can using like looking up instruction booklets and stuff online. But the true like experience of those games aesthetically is having the instruction booklet, which has like images of the heroes and all the monsters and stuff in there. That's like Toriyama's actual art. And you're meant to be picturing those things in your head intuitively as you play the game. And especially when you get into something like Dragon Quest 3 that has like all of the different like jobs or like classes the characters can have, and each of one can have a male or a female counterpart, and Toriyama has a unique design for all of them. And if you had the Dragon Quest 3 booklet, or you can just look them up online, like that's who your party is this is what they all look like. They all look like these characters that look like they could exist alongside Goku or Trunks or any of those, because it's very much of a piece with Toriyama's overall kind of art style. And it is that thing about Dragon Quest. I think it is like a key component to makes it so good, and especially in Japan made it like impossibly popular, is that art is incredible. And then what it did obviously to like influence the style of stuff that came after it that was then influenced, and the way that people draw things, especially like swords and stuff like that, it's so pulled from Dragon Quest, like the specifics of how that kind of Western fantasy idea filtered through a Japanese lens. Like Toriyama just kind of like cracked that idea. So even if, the specific art style of whatever kind of more modern series you're looking at is not necessarily a Toriyama art style, there are kernels of design elements that you can so clearly trace back to the classic Dragon Quest art. So it is, it's not a thing that either of us grew up with in that same way. It's not sort of like essential to our childhoods like Dragon Ball is, but it is like from an academic point of view, when you're just like looking at the world of video games, it's that thing of you didn't realize that you were missing a piece of the puzzle of like the makeup of the like world and like art and history and culture of video games until you play Dragon Quest 1 and you see that art, you see it in that context and all that. You're like, oh, this is the like how this thing came to be. Everything, like whatever you're watching an isekai anime or you're playing a modern JRPG, whatever you're doing, like you see how that Dragon Quest 1 fits into that slot in the way that when you watch Citizen Kane, it's like, oh, this part of like movie history, like it makes like this camera sort of move in this style. All of a sudden this like makes sense to me. Or you read like a Sherlock Holmes mystery and you're like, oh, this is what mysteries are. Like I understand now. Like Before I kind of had a sense of what this genre is. Now I get it because I read this thing or watched this thing or played this thing that is like the thing that created this whole style.
Absolutely. It's because I think in the West we did, certainly growing up, and some of this has changed a little bit, but Final Fantasy was always the JRPG we were kind of served up here. And Final Fantasy is the fucking weirdest hodgepodge series in the world. I don't think this is talked about enough, that like liking one Final Fantasy game is absolutely no guarantee you will like another one. If you dug Final Fantasy X, if that was your shit, I cannot tell you if you will like Final Fantasy 12 or 13 or 15, you know?
Yeah.
If you are all in on Final Fantasy 14 because you are an MMO guy, even though Final Fantasy 16 was made by the same team, I have no idea if that will be for you, right? Like, that's the kind of thing. Like, it's you know, Final Fantasy 16 last year and 7 Rebirth this year, totally different. You know, Final Fantasy 6 to 7 is such a weird jump, even though some of the same people worked on them. But Dragon Quest is this very kind of auteur-driven series where Yuji Hoри's voice as a storyteller and game designer, Toriyama's voice as an artist, and Koichi Sugiyama's voice as a composer, just that is what that series is. If you like Dragon Quest 1, you will like Dragon Quest 11, and vice versa. Like, if you came in with 11, 1, you know, it's older, it might have some hurdles for you, but you will be charmed. When the slime pops up for the first time, you will smile as you fight that little thing, right? You will enjoy the music, you will enjoy the art. And Dragon Quest so invites you to go on an adventure in this inviting world that is complete unto itself. There's none of the kind of aesthetic irregularity that sometimes can be charming, but can also be off-putting. And like, again, original Final Fantasy VII, why is Cloud fighting a house in the slums? I don't know. But in Dragon Quest, I'm fighting cool slimes and tigers, and in some games, I'm making them my friends. I mean, fuck, if you like Minecraft, but you think Minecraft's a little bland, have I got a game for you? Dragon Quest Builders is out there, and Dragon Quest Builders is the best thing ever, and you know why? It's because you're building Akira Toriyama worlds. It's an Akira Toriyama building simulator, and it fucking slaps.
Yes, where it's like, I want to just get a bunch of like random villagers from like a weird town in Dragon Ball and build like cool houses for them. That is what Dragon Quest Builders is as a game.
So wonderful. Yeah. And then, you know, I know you and neither of us has ever gotten as into Dr. Slump. Everything I've seen from it has always put a smile on my face. It's never had the best English translation, and the anime has never come out over here, so it's always been harder to access. But, you know, Arale is iconic for a reason, and the later parts of Dr. Slump are very much influential on Dragon Ball, because that's where he starts doing tournaments and slightly longer story arcs and fun things like that. And there's a pretty direct through line from the final chapters of Slump and the early chapters of Dragon Ball, which in an artistic sense is just one long progression for him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Like this definitely has like jumped up very high on my list of manga I want to read now over the summer when I have a bit more time for this kind of stuff. Is to actually do Dr. Slump proper, because it's like a thing that I've gotten lots of bits and pieces of. Obviously, you've got the crossover stuff in early Dragon Ball and the General Blue arc where Goku meets Arale, and then you have like the Super anime did the Arale episode, which is very fun, where she just is impossibly powerful because she's a gag manga character. And yeah, she's like, Arale is just such an iconic character. Even if you haven't really seen Dr. Slump or engaged with it in a deep way, you know, she just does jump out to you as this sort of very quintessentially Toriyama-esque creation. Even just looking at the art, you can't help but fall in love with that character.
She might be... like, Goku is the most popular, the slime is the most widely seen in video games. Arale might be, I think, the quintessential Akira Toriyama character design, because also of that mix of, like, kind of light mecha elements, which he really liked. You actually don't see it a ton in Dragon Ball in the story, but you'll see it on his covers and his illustrations everywhere. He loved drawing machines and cars, and he comes from that same generation as people like Hayao Miyazaki, who, or all the artists on Lupin the Third, who just love drawing cars and trucks and watches and things like that. And there's more of that in Dr. Slump. Although some of that element kind of comes into Dragon Ball through Bulma and her family, and you get some of that. But Arale is absolutely just, you know, I remember, I think it's it did eventually come to the US. I imported it from Japan when it first came out, but it's like the Jump Superstars fighting game from like 2013 that was on PS3. And that one you could fight as Arale, and that just tickled me to no end, running around fighting people as Arale. Like fighting Luffy as Arale was just delightful.
And she's the most powerful character because that's what she has to be.
Yeah, she's a gag manga hero. No, there's Dr. Slump. He did a million, you know, one-offs and various things, most of which have been translated at this point. I don't think we've ever gotten Neko Majin, which was his early 2000 series. There was, Viz did put out last year a big hardcover called Akira Toriyama's Manga Theater, which in Japan was 3 volumes. They combined it all. It's all the same content, but it's in one giant hardcover here, and it's all of his various one-shots from before Dragon Ball. And then there is also Sandland. Talk about that more in a minute. And there is Jocko the Galactic Patrolman, which he wrote the same year Battle of Gods came out. And if you've never read Jocko, that is one of my favorite things he's ever done. I desperately hope they one day do a movie or anime based on it, but even just in manga form, it's perfect. It is so low-key. It is so laid back. It is, I think, the funniest thing he ever wrote. It tears me up laughing. It's so in that kind of like droll sense of humor vein that he could have once in a while. And it's also very sweet. It shows him at the absolute, I think, height of his powers in terms of paneling and everything. It's so gorgeous. I love that manga to death. And if people have not read that one, I can't recommend it highly enough.
Yeah, it's a thing where I feel like I need to go read more of his other stuff because I've not read Jocko. But you have the Sandland stuff, which was like, it's one of those other things that makes losing Toriyama so weird. Is like, I had just watched the day before he passed, they did a big video that was breaking down that Sandland game they're making, and I was like, hell yeah, this game actually looks fucking sick. Like, that game looks awesome. It's like Akira Toriyama Armored Core, basically, because it's like you get your big like tank or whatever that you can customize with different parts to make your awesome looking Toriyama vehicle that could be on like a random cover of Dragon Ball with Bulma on it with an AK-47 for no apparent reason. And it's it's where you can tell how like important and popular Toriyama is, that now they started, before his passing, even trying to dig up like what's any random piece of Toriyama ephemera we have not yet done something with, because they did a movie Sandland, then they're doing the game, and then they're doing a TV show Sandland. So it's like, it feels like they're trying to find whatever they can to sort of capitalize on how, good his designs are. Like, even just purely like the designs of the characters and the vehicles in the world, like just making something else using those elements is like enough to kind of justify an entire project existing.
Yeah, and Sandland is special too. If you've never read it, it's a 1-volume manga. I remember getting it from the library when I was a kid because it was one of the things Viz put out. And it's just that single volume. It was the first weekly manga he did after Dragon Ball. He did other one-shots. I think Neko Majin came after Sandland. But yes, Sean, should I just go through the list of upcoming Toriyama projects we're getting that I have here? So the first one is Sandland. There's a Sandland TV anime based on that 1-volume manga. It is premiering globally on Disney Plus and Hulu, either one, on March 20th with 6 episodes. And I learned this from Anime News Network. Those 6 episodes are the movie that came out last year in Japan, recut and extended for TV. They have about 20 minutes that weren't in the movie form added in, and then it's 6 episodes of TV, but it is a full 13-episode season, and episodes 8 to 13 will follow once a week after those first 6 come out. So if you have Disney Plus or Hulu, it'll be airing there. I'm super psyched for that. It's very much using the art style from Dragon Ball Super Superhero, where it's a 3D anime, but I think Toriyama's art takes to that style really beautifully, and I'm very excited to see that, because I was wondering, that movie came out last August in Japan, and I was very curious when we would get it. This is the form we're getting it, is in this TV show, so I'm excited for that. We're getting that Sandland video game at some point this year. We are getting Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, which is the new Tenkaichi Budokai game. Those games were called Sparking in Japan. They were called, inexplicably, Tenkaichi Budokai over here, even though that's backwards. But anyway, that's the 4th of those, and it's kind of a revival of that series. They haven't given a date, but that's probably later this year. Then this fall, we're getting the big one, Dragon Ball Daima, which is the new anime from Toei, where Toriyama has contributed the story and character designs. And the producer, Akio Yoku, said that Toriyama was deeply involved beyond his usual capacity. And from what I've heard, that's not just empty talk. I also saw reports that he Toriyama and his office at Shueisha were even looking in on individual cuts of animation, which they never did for Super or any of those. It's got a absolutely phenomenal pedigree behind it. The director, there's two. It's Aya Komaki, who's worked on a bunch of One Piece in the Wano arc, so great stuff. And Yoshitaka Yashima, who's worked on Dragon Ball all the way since movie 5, the first Cooler movie. Rumiko Nagai is doing the color design after they also did Broly and Superhero, which I think have some of the best color design in the series. Yuko Kakihara, who wrote Shihaya Furu, Cells at Work, a bunch of Digimon, is doing the writing. And then the artist on this one, the character designer, is Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru, who is one of the best. He took over along with Tadayoshi Yamamoto after the Frieza arc during the Cell years. He was also the main guy on GT and a bunch of other stuff, but he's one of my favorite people who's done Dragon Ball art. So it's a real all-star bench of Toei talent. And I'm just super psyched for Daima because the later half of Dragon Ball Super was a disaster out the gate. It got better and better, and then the later half was kind of on the tip of the spear of Toei getting their fucking shit together, which then continued into stuff like One Piece Wano, or Dragon Quest Adventure of Dai, and now we're finally seeing Dragon Ball get to benefit from that. And I mean, what we've seen, like, this one has been in the oven so much longer than Super was. Like, this was getting a pilot at Toei like 2 years ago internally, just to make sure it was good, and then once Dragon Quest Adventure of Dai ended, those people rolled off to Daima. So it's been in the works much longer. That Super anime basically was, they just hit the ground running and they're like, we don't have a story yet. Okay, Battle of Gods on a boat. And that's how that started. This is much more fulsome, and I'm psyched for it. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, I'm extremely excited. They did a trailer not that long ago. It looks awesome. Like, I like the idea of, let's do bringing back Kid Goku, but good. I think is a nice idea, you know, as someone who just so desperately wants to like the first section of Dragon Ball GT before all the Super Saiyan 4 stuff happens, where they're like trying to recapture the classic Dragon Ball vibe, and they just can't do it. And it's heartbreaking every time you go back, especially because you've got Dan Dan Kokoro Hikare Teku. Yep. That song is so good, and the animation is so good with it. You're like, this is the perfect opening for the show they want to make. It's just the show is not good, and it's
actually
awful.
It's one of the reasons I'm glad Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru is working on this one, because GT was his baby artistically, and GT looks great. Like, that's the other thing that hurts about GT, is it has great designs. Super Saiyan 4, love it or hate it, is a great big swing. You know, all of these cool things, and it just, narratively, that team was burned out. And I understand why. They had been doing it for a long time, and they suddenly were doing it without Toriyama. But anyway, yeah, GT is always a show where I'm like, I love the swing, I don't love the follow through, but Daima feels like in some ways going to be another swing at something like that. But oh man, it looks gorgeous. It's doing the same thing that Superhero did, where it's going back to some of the colors that Toriyama used in the manga that were not carried into the anime. Like, the gi is yellow instead of orange or red. It was always orange and red in the anime. He always drew it as yellow in the comics. And there's just stuff like that that's just cool to see, that I'm excited for. And you say Kid Goku, we're also getting Kid Vegeta, and I'm excited for that. Does Ryo Horikawa still do Kid Vegeta? I hope so, because that's going to be funny.
It's got to be, right? I mean, I'm blanking on his name, but the guy who does Trunks, he's had to play Kid Trunks forever. So, you know.
Takeshi Kusao. But like, that was I don't know. I'm so excited to see how they do that. Obviously, Masuko Nozawa is doing everything always, and she will never die. God, don't take her. Don't, you son of a bitch. All right, so we got Dragon Ball Daima. Dragon Quest XII, The Flames of Fate. That was announced back in 2021. I have to assume Toriyama did a bunch of work for it. We have not gotten confirmation of that, but like, character design work would be the first thing that's finished in a game like that. So I assume his contributions, like, maybe he will not have drawn the cover art for that game or something, but I hope there's a lot of Toriyama in it.
There has to be. I can't imagine with how long it's been in development that he did not already do the bulk of at least the design work. As you say, there might be like pieces of art that normally he would have made for the game that will not happen. But that sort of fundamental work, I mean, they need to build the character models for the monsters and for the main characters and all that kind of stuff. You can't do that without having the art that informs it.
Yeah. So, we'll get that at some point. over in, Dragon Ball Super world, it's often misreported that Toriyama wrote the Dragon Ball Super manga. That's wrong. Even the Viz translation says story by Akira Toriyama. That's not his credit in Japanese. It's Toyotaro, the artist on that, writes and draws all the chapters, and Toriyama has given some feedback. He gave some outlines, like he outlined the Galactic Patrol prisoner arc, but, he was not day-to-day on that manga. But that does mean there is more material that, like the Super anime, where he provided broad outlines and other people did the, day-to-day work on, that's out there. That could be animated. It can certainly go, you can read it. So, there's that too. And it's just the list of amount of stuff that is out there that his hands were still in is vast. And that is both something that makes his passing more sad, but also, it's so cool that we get to enjoy all this stuff in the years to come that he was still actively involved in.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Do you want to read a couple of these statements from different creators who were inspired by Toriyama? Some of these are so lovely. If you could pull that webpage up, Sean. Let's start with Yuji Horii, who was the creator of Dragon Quest. Do you want to read his statement here?
Sure, yes. So this is Yuji Horii's statement. Honestly, I'm still filled with a sense of disbelief at this all too sudden news of Toriyama-san's passing. Toriyama-san was an acquaintance of mine from when I was a writer for Shonen Jump, and at the behest of his editor, Torishima-san, I decided to ask him to do the art for Dragon Quest when I started working on that game. More than 37 years later, he's drawn so many charming designs for characters and monsters that I could hardly count them all. The history of Dragon Quest is of a piece with Toriyama-san's character designs. Toriyama-san, along with the late Sugiyama-sensei, was a longtime partner in making Dragon Quest. To think that he would die. As for what else I could say, I can't put anything more into words than this. It's really, truly heartbreaking.
All right, I'm going to jump ahead to Eiichiro Oda, the creator of One Piece. He says, "It's just too soon. The hole that he's left is just too big. A wave of sadness washes over me at the thought that I'll never see him again. I idolized him from childhood, and I still remember the day he first called me by my name. I fondly recall positively jumping for joy with Kishimoto-san on the way home the first day he used the word friends to describe us. I also remember the last conversation we ever had. He was one of those who passed the baton in an era where it was thought you'd rot your brain if you read comics, and created an era where children and adults alike could enjoy reading them. So this is what you can do with comics. So you can get into that world. That's the dream he gave us. It was like watching a hero bravely charging ahead. I think the excitement and the emotion at the time of Dragon Ball's original serialization must have really taken root in not just cartoonists, but also creators active in all sorts of industries when they were young boys. His presence was like a great sheltering tree. For the cartoonists of our generation who got to stand on the same stage, the closer we got to the Toriyama oeuvre, the more we became aware of just how large that presence was, to a frightening degree. But even so, it was simply a pleasure to get to meet the carefree man himself. After all, our love for Toriyama-sensei is in our very blood. With respect and gratitude for the world filled with creativity that Toriyama-sensei left us, I express my sincere condolences. Rest in peace. May heaven be the kind of joyful world you envisioned, Sensei." That last sentence wrecked me on Thursday night. And one thing we just haven't said is the best vision of the afterlife in the history of fiction is Akira Toriyama's.
Yeah.
It's great. It's on one level, it's a scary bureaucracy, but on the other, it's pretty cool. I mean, you get to go meet Enma, you get to hang out with Kaio-sama. It's pretty good.
Yeah, you just get to be up in the fluffy clouds and have your soul cleansed and be resurrected, or you have to go to hell and hang out with like the red and blue Oni, and go on like big chases and stuff if you exist in the anime version.
So I thought, Sean, you could read Masashi Kishimoto's. He's the author of Naruto, which I know you love.
Yeah, this is one. I saw this on Twitter and Reddit when he originally posted this, and this one really fucked me up when I originally read it. So this is Kishimoto, the creator of Naruto. "It was so sudden that, to be honest, I have no idea what to write or how. For now, I'd like to take the liberty of talking about my feelings and what I had wanted to tell Toriyama-sensei someday. I grew up alongside his work, first in the lower grades of elementary school with Dr. Slump, then in the upper grades with Dragon Ball. It was simply natural that Sensei's work should be by my side as a part of my life. Even if something unpleasant happened, Dragon Ball allowed me to forget about it every week. That was a saving grace for a country boy like me who didn't have anything else. That's honestly because Dragon Ball was just so much fun. I was a university student when the unthinkable happened. Dragon Ball, which had been a natural part of my life for so many years, suddenly came to an end. Racked by a tremendous sense of loss, I no longer knew where I should turn for enjoyment, but at the same time, that allowed me to realize the greatness of the master who brought Dragon Ball into the world. I want to create work like Sensei's too. I want to be like Sensei. Thinking this, I set my sights on becoming a cartoonist, and as I followed in Sensei's footsteps, that sense of loss disappeared as well. That's because making comics was fun. Chasing after Sensei allowed me to find a new source of enjoyment. Sensei was always my guiding light, the man I admired. He might find it a nuisance, but I'm thankful whether he'd appreciate it or not. To me, he was the god of my salvation and a god of manga. The first time I met him, I was so nervous that I couldn't say anything. But as we met time after time as panelists for the Tezuka Award, I got to be able to talk to him. I'll never forget the slightly bashful but not yet actually displeased smile he gave us as both Oda-san and I, the Dragon Ball children, reverted to a couple of kids seemingly competing over how much we could gush about our enjoyment of the series. Now, I've just received the news about his passing. I'm racked with a tremendous sense of loss even greater than when Dragon Ball ended. I still don't know how to deal with this hole in my heart. I can't even bring myself to read my beloved Dragon Ball. I don't think I've really been able to properly convey in writing what I wanted to tell him. Everyone around the world was still looking forward to Sensei's work. If only I could really have one wish granted with the Dragon Balls. I'm sorry. It might be selfish, but I'm grieving Sensei. Akira Toriyama Sensei, thank you for so many enjoyable works over these 45 years, and also thank you for all your hard work. You have truly earned your rest. As for his surviving family members, who I suspect are still deeply mourning his loss, please don't forget to take care of yourselves. I pray that Akira Toriyama Sensei will rest in peace.
Yeah, when he talks about Oda and him as the Dragon Ball children, yeah. Oh my God. And it just, I mean, Sean, you wouldn't have this thing that you compare everything to if it weren't for Dragon Ball. If it weren't for Dragon Ball inspiring Masashi Kishimoto, what would you compare every story ever told to, Sean?
It's true. You know, it's you know, it's the fruits of Dragon Ball is what gives us Naruto. It's also what gives us One Piece. And I do find it's like very touching that both Oda and Kishimoto refer to the other one in their like relationship with Toriyama. Like if if it's not obvious enough, just like engaging with the work, you know, of how deep that influence is. It's like, you know, from both of them, it's like as a pair, these people who, you know, sort of like created the, you know, that continuation of that new era of the shonen style action series. It's like that's the straight from the mouth itself of how important that influence was. Yeah.
You know, and I think it's easy to forget the kind of timetables here, but Dragon Ball ends, I think, in 1995, 94, 95 in manga form. And, you know, Naruto and One Piece, I think, are both 97 and 98 in Weekly Shonen Jump. So, like, it's a pretty quick turnaround that influence kind of comes bearing fruit in those two series that, to some degree, I mean, One Piece has never ended. Naruto has continued in various forms. Boruto's only just ending, right?
I don't know the context of. I know that like they hit like a big shifting point in that series a little bit. So yeah.
But anyway, like, you know, so just that. Oh man, it's the historical continuum, I think, is just fascinating. Okay, here's another one that got me. Masako Nozawa, the legend herself, the voice of, we're reading from Kanzenshu, the fan site, and I like that they label her voice of Son Goku et al., which is correct. She is the voice of every male Goku family member, and some that aren't even in his family, like Turles in Tree of Might.
They should just say voice of and just have a picture of Goku's hair.
Yes.
And Gohan. It's like that's the two characters he plays, the Goku's hair and then Gohan.
Yeah. All right. She says, I don't want to believe it. My head is completely empty, save for the feeling of not even wanting to think about it. Still, when I remember that every time we met, he would always say to me, I'm leaving Goku in your hands, okay? I feel that I could be by Goku's side until the end of my days. Sensei, please watch over us from up there in the sky. May you make a peaceful departure. Yeah. Do you want to read Toshio Furukawa's? He's the voice of Piccolo.
My manager brought the news of Akira Toriyama sensei's passing to me by saying, "You're only the second one I'm telling this to, right after Mako-san," which is Masako Nozawa's sort of nickname. The very first thought that popped into my head was, I wonder how Mako-san must be feeling right now. Dragon Ball is Mako-san's life work to the point that Goku is practically a part of her, even more than Piccolo is a part of me. The advanced screening of Dragon Ball Super Superhero just before the general opening was the last time I ever saw him. I hereby express my deepest condolences.
That one hit me pretty hard. Here's Ryo Horikawa, the voice of Vegeta. This was completely unexpected, so the only thing I can say right now is that I just cannot believe it. And right as his new series had just started development, right as he was about to spin this thrilling, exciting tale. It's just too sudden and truly regrettable. Thank you for providing us with such beautiful works of art. Please rest in peace. So, beautiful, eloquent statement from Horikawa, but he also tweeted as Vegeta. Do you want to have Vegeta's reaction, Sean?
Yes. "Hey, you bastard! It's way too early for you to die yet."
Perfect. And you know what? I love that because Toriyama would have chuckled at that. I'm very sure. I love it. Mami Koyama, wonderful, legendary voice actress who, a million things. She was the voice of Arale, the voice of Lunch. She's Big Mom in One Piece. There for that whole ride. She said, "I've known Toriyama sensei ever since the days of Dr. Slump Arale-chan." That was the name of the first Slump anime. He would never show his face on the mass media, but he would always make sure to appear as a guest on my radio shows and my live concerts to give me his support. He was a second Senbei Norimaki to me. That's the doctor in Slump. His grand achievement of giving this world love, dreams, and strength is so great that I would say is outright unparalleled. I offer both my most heartfelt gratitude and my deepest condolences and pray that you might rest in peace. Yeah. And I don't know if there are any of these others that you wanted to go through as well, Sean, but those were the ones I wanted to hit.
I mean, needless to say, there's like countless others. Like, I know after, in that like 90 minutes between me getting the news and me having to go to bed, I went on Twitter and because I was just kind of curious to see, I put Toriyama's name in Japanese to see that. And it's like, every single anime director, every voice actor ever posted something about it, because it's just like, how could you not? Like, whether you're someone involved directly in the work or you're someone who grew up on it. I know like one that hit me really hard because I watched the YouTube channel he's on is Nakamura Yuichi, the voice actor. He posted, it was like a full day before he posted his response, but he basically posted a picture of he's got like a whole big like wall that's just a collection of Dragon Quest memorabilia with like all the different games that are in these sort of like, clear plastic boxes and stuff to have them be preserved. And he just basically posted that with a message of like how much that series meant to him. But it's like everybody involved in that world who was touched in some way by something that Toriyama created, whether it was Dragon Quest, Dragon Ball, or most likely both of those things. It is, as like deeply felt as the loss is for us, if you're Japanese from that generation who would have been so like submerged within that culture and like encountering it at every single turn. For us, while it was very popular, it was still a thing that only kids were into and was still like, it was way more niche than like truly cultural touchstones like American football and like the NFL, that kind of stuff that hits every single part of American culture. Dragon Ball was still in that regard relatively niche. Just far more popular than most of the other things that existed in that sphere, like a Yu Yu Hakusho or something like that. Dragon Ball was way above those things. But if you're Japanese and part of that generation that grew up with Dragon Quest and grew up with Dragon Ball, like, I cannot imagine how central that would be to your childhood, It's crazy.
Well, and I just, if you want to know how great Toriyama was, look at all the comments from other industry people just talking about their awe of his work. Like, that's the mark, right? Like, I follow a bunch of animators who work on One Piece. I follow various illustrators. And it was just the immediate, like, oh my God, he, like, he's the mark, like, that I hold my, that's like, and for so many of them, I follow Henry Thurlow, who's done a bunch of great work on One Piece in recent episodes, and his comments, or Mika Picasso, she did the art in Fire Emblem Engage, and I've enjoyed following her mostly for her crazy pictures, but she just had several threads of tweets talking about just the influence. And I wouldn't have even made that connection in my head necessarily, because her art is so weird and idiosyncratic. But then I look at it again, I'm like, no, I can see it. I can it's there for everyone on some level. But yeah, the industry reaction was huge. All right. Do you want to go through a couple of listener comments I got, Sean?
Yeah.
So, okay, the first one I wanted to share, this was from Tony Chopper on Twitter, sticking with the shonen theme, said, I had a couple questions on Toriyama and questions for you and Sean for your podcast. First, I was at work when I found out he died. I opened Twitter in a quiet moment and saw your tweet about it. I work at a hospital, so I couldn't really process it in the moment. When my shift ended and I was driving home, I felt tears running down my face. I enjoyed reading your tweets about him. Thank you very much, Tony Chopper. That means a lot, and I absolutely sympathize. My first question is, what about Toriyama's style of design and storytelling most resonated with you and you think made him so successful? I think we've addressed bits of that, Sean, but I think that's a good pointed way to say it. And my first thought with that is that on Thursday night when the news broke and I was really sad, and I was just leafing through some of the books, like manga books, art books, my Dragon Quest book here, I had all these involuntary smiles on my face, even though I was very sad. And I think if I'm thinking about what about his style most resonated with you, it's just the overwhelming, effervescent joy of everything that radiates from his work. And that's not to say Dragon Ball or his other series couldn't have their heavier moments. They have some really great character drama. Look at when Vegeta dies on Namek and that kind of handover he does to Goku and moments like that. But I think it is the humor, the good humor, the belief in like the betterment of people and characters. Like, something I truly love about Dragon Ball is that at a certain point, all of Goku's best friends are people who hated him at one point, And that starts with Yamcha and Krillin, and it goes on to Piccolo and Vegeta. Even Frieza gets brought into the fold to a certain extent in Dragon Ball Super. I wouldn't say they become friends, but, they work together. And I just, that spirit in the storytelling, and like in Dragon Quest, that all the monsters you fight have a smile on their face. There's something about that sense of the world as animated, not just because it's drawings, but that it has a spirit of animation to it that I adore.
Yeah, for me, I think there's two things. One is, I think everything you're talking about there, of like, it's the humor and the heart of it is so tremendous. And part and parcel to that, to me, is the kind of doesn't give a fuck attitude, the like fly by the seat of your pants nature of the storytelling. You can tell, obviously, that there are lots of elements of the narrative of Dragon Ball that were, not decided well ahead of time, and were like, things were shifted or moved around, and there's a sort of spontaneity to the storytelling. Well, at the same time, there are like flashes of like the most brilliant, intricate storytelling here and there, where you have like, stuff like the Namek arc, where it's Gohan and Krillin trying to get the Dragon Balls, and then Vegeta's there as this like third party, while Frieza and their henchmen are like destroying the Namek villages and all that. There's such a rich vein of like very intricate storytelling there. And then at the same time, you also have the most insane shit you've ever seen in your life, which is Goku goes Super Saiyan. Goku, which is like, a thing that nobody's done for 1,000 years. Goku defeats Frieza, seemingly. The very next thing that happens, because there's not, especially whether it's the anime or the manga and how they're originally released, it's just immediately the next thing that happens is, shit, Frieza's actually alive. It's 3 years later. He's part robot. He crashes on Earth. Oh, here's a random kid with a sword. Oh, by the way, he also can go Super Saiyan. Oh, by the way, he kills Frieza in like 2 seconds. Oh, and also he's Bulma and Vegeta's son from the future. Yep. The son of the girl who's been in this series since the very, very beginning. And the dude who, 6 months ago or whatever, was massacring Namekians on planet Namek. Like, by the way, they had a kid. He's the coolest person you've ever seen. He's got the coolest character design ever. He's got a sword, and he's a Super Saiyan. Like, that's the most insane storytelling choice. you could possibly conceive of, and it works 110%. And that's like that open, spontaneous energy that I think is like at the core of Dragon Ball storytelling, and like it's there in the humor and it's there in everything else that I just adore. And like nobody else could fucking pull off that shit. Nobody else could do that, or like half of the things that happen in Dragon Ball. And he does it and did it effortlessly. The other thing for me with Dragon Ball, like thinking about like the core appeal, especially when you're coming at it from like kind of the more Toonami generation, Dragon Ball Z, like that side of it, I do think there is something so fundamental about the notion of ki and energy and kind of like self-fulfillment and self-empowerment that is at the core of Dragon Ball and the way that those things are visualized. There is something about the idea of going Super Saiyan, of that there is something deep inside of you, some power or energy that once pushed to a certain point, once like, you know, things demand it, like something so wrong has happened and you are called upon to correct that, and that there's an injustice in the world you must fix, that deep inside your being, some power comes overflowing, and it, you know, that it emanates you like it's like encasing you in fire, and your hair stands up and shines gold. Like that idea is so powerful, and the visual expression of it is so powerful that it feels like wrong that the universe doesn't actually work that way. Like it feels like some, like, you know, if God is real, he fucked up in creating reality, because you can't actually go Super Saiyan, because it feels like that's how it should work. It feels like our emotions, this feeling, this whatever it is deep inside of our beings, like that should be able to hit a point if you're the right person and you've trained hard enough and you're pure enough of heart, that should be able to overflow so much that it just comes pouring out of you, like that energy, like that idea and how it's expressed, which is to me so fundamental to the appeal of the shonen action concept in and of itself. That to me is like, that's what I see of like reflected in my students of like the core appeal. You know, like I think that is the thing that makes it this concept that is so universal that it like touches everybody, and like and you know, a specific kind of person in particular it will affect really strongly. But I think it's that one of those core things of why people have such a strong attachment to the series, this idea that it just feels right. It feels like you should be able to go Super Saiyan. It feels like I should be able to go Kamehameha and fire energy from my hands in order to right the injustices of the world. Like that is a thing that Toriyama got right, that reality fucked up. And I think that to me is like the core appeal of the franchise to a lot of people.
Absolutely. And you know, he always, up through the work he did on Super, was the best at these anime transformations. Just the best. Like, Super Saiyan is so cool. Super Saiyan 2 being not really a visual overhaul, but an attitudinal one, that like what makes Gohan interesting when he goes Super Saiyan 2 is not that he looks super different, but that he is attitudinally kind of unrecognizable and scary. Super Saiyan 3 being this cool maximalist long hair, but it's completely impractical, and so no one ever uses it. And then in Super, or the Super era, like Battle of Gods, I love that Super Saiyan God is like Goku slimming down, not bulking up. And then, of course, you and I have talked at length about how much we like Ultra Instinct as like such a cool idea that I just don't think anyone else working in this space would come up with, because it's not really a transformation. It's a technique that Goku works at to try to get to over the course of that arc, and that's what makes it so sweet.
Yeah, and I think it's just like that core philosophy of like self-improvement and hard work is so purely expressed in things like the character of Goku and the core philosophy of the series, you know, like the kind of, to me, the sort of fundamental Dragon Ball storyline, which is the Saiyan arc through to the end of the Frieza stuff, which is this very like pure expression of like the human and emotions and like the soul over brutality and machinery and technology and cruelty. And it's just like the perfect expression of those ideas in this big, crazy action style martial arts fantasy. It's martial arts sci-fi fantasy because also it's aliens, which is, you know, a thing that's easy to take for granted, but it is every once in a while. In talking about things of like it's insane, and nobody would ever have done this, is taking your martial arts fantasy and saying, oh, by the way, our main character is also an alien, and here's his brother, who is also an alien, and we're going to kill that brother off, like, immediately and never bring him up again. But yeah, now we're going to space, and there are Dragon Balls in space. That guy who was a demon, demons, no, he's an alien. And it's just like, yeah, that's just what it is.
It's something I think we take for granted in the US because we started with DBZ, but it is so funny to me that DBZ, the second half of the series, opens by revealing that the two combatants from the previous fight that you thought were people from Earth are both aliens, one from Namek and one from the planet Vegeta. Yeah. It's just great. It's great. All right, Tony Chopper also asked, what is your favorite non-Dragon Ball series he worked on? That's so broad. It's like you could answer that in a couple different ways. Like Dragon Quest obviously is amazing. I think if I'm just picking a manga, I would pick... Okay, Jocko the Galactic Patrolman links up with Dragon Ball at the end, and Jocko then became a character in Dragon Ball. But I feel like as its own standalone thing, I could say that is my favorite other manga he did. So yeah, I guess that would be my easy answer.
Yeah, mine would be Dragon Quest is the other thing for me.
Finally, I am planning on getting a new tattoo inspired by his work. What do you think would be the best design? Now, I don't think either of us have tattoos, Sean, so we're not experts on this. But my immediate reaction is the 4-star ball, right? That's a good tattoo. Would be the 4-star ball.
Yeah, you could do the 4-star ball. You could do like if you wanted to go for like a kanji, you could go for one of the different kanji, like the kame, the turtle. If you wanted to do that, or you could go with which one of the kanji in his name? I'm trying to remember. I think it's the go in his name is what Goku then eventually gets when he goes to Namek. You know, there's a slow progression in his gi of where he goes from having the kame one, which also has the thing that looks like a Z in it, which is why Dragon Ball Z is called Dragon Ball Z, and then he has the Kaio-sama one, which is the Kai kanji, which means world, which looks kind of lame. It's like they make kind of fun of it because it's not a good looking kanji to have on your thing. And then when he goes to Namek, which is when Goku, I think in the progression, you're meant to kind of understand, oh, he has kind of progressed to the absolute heights. Like he is like a master now, and he has his own kanji, which is the go in his name. That is the kanji on his gi at that point. That the go could also be pretty good because it's a cool looking kanji. So there's some ideas as well.
Or just a touch that I'm absolutely sure Toriyama came up with. I think it's in Resurrection F. The little doodle that Beerus does on the front of their gis that they have in Super. It's just the little circle. No one would know what that is as a tattoo, but I think it would be funny. Yeah, those would be like I feel like 4-star ball would be a great one on like the arm or wrist. But yeah, those are all good options. Any kanji Goku ever wore on his gi would be good.
Yes. Although I'd probably avoid the world one because it's not the coolest one.
All right. Thank you, Tony Chopper. What else have we got? From Vang on Twitter, Toriyama's works brought magic into everyone's lives who engage with them. That's reaching the pinnacle of artistry to me. He might well be the artist of our times. I don't disagree. Very well. Yeah.
I mean, he's obviously... like, especially if you're defining it as like a popular artist who makes like popular works rather than like fine art or whatever. I mean, he's absolutely in that conversation as like the most important and influential popular artist of his generation and of like the late 20th century, for sure.
Connor on Twitter replied to me, "It's strange, Toriyama's death hasn't hit me as hard as Miura's in 2021. I think he's referring to Kentaro Miura, who wrote Berserk, which I know is very, very big for people. Kind of similar thing.
Because Berserk was still in progress. Yeah, that one that hit pretty hard.
Yeah, but it's undeniable the monumental impact Toriyama's works had on humanity. Characters like Goku, Vegeta, and Piccolo will be lasting figures in fiction, much like the Greek pantheon. Rest in peace to a legend." I agree. Get out of here, Thor. Get out of here, Athena. Get out of here, Zeus. Piccolo is my boy. If I had to pick a fictional god to worship, it would be the Demon King Piccolo.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a good point, though, of, like, you know, I wouldn't necessarily go to Greek pantheon, but my brain goes to, like, Sherlock Holmes in that kind of, like, here is that sort of such an iconic fictional character that is just, like, kind of transcends cultural boundaries and is, you know, everyone, Dracula, Darth Vader, like, you know them just at a glance. They're so
Yeah.
big, Goku is absolutely that. You know, they put him in the Macy Day's Thanksgiving parade. You know, it's like you fucking made it. And
Yes.
so there you go.
Just, I will seeing Goku, because I think one of the years they did it at Macy's, it was even him with the fucking blue hair, and I was just like, we've made it, guys. It has crossed over that we've got blue hair Goku in the Macy's parade. Oh man. No, I mean, there's a reason people always do the Goku versus Superman jokes, because Goku is as big as Superman.
Yeah.
You know, all over the world, maybe bigger. Okay, Vino Burrito, I like that name, replied, I think Toriyama's passing has been the only celebrity death to really ever get a real emotional reaction out of me. Has there ever been a major figure's passing in your guy's life, someone that you've never met in person that hit quite this way? I said earlier Clarence Clemens was one of the other ones that really got me. I don't know about you, Sean.
I mean, I think this is the biggest one for me. I mean, there's like the other one, this is not because this person was anywhere near as famous, but more like I engaged with it so much, was Ryan Davis, who was one of the original founders of GiantBomb.com, and he like hosted that podcast for years. And you know, I was just like such a big fan of that website and listened to that podcast religiously and watched all of their video content and stuff. He died extremely suddenly shortly after his wedding also, which made it particularly brutal feeling. Like that would be the other one in terms of, but that one also, like, you know, obviously, you know, he'd had no idea who I was as a person, but that felt a lot more close because I was hearing his voice like every single week. But in terms of like other really famous people that are like that level of distance, Toriyama is definitely the biggest. You know, I felt definitely like a hit when Steve Ditko passed, and Stan Lee, because both of them are really like important to my childhood in a similar kind of way. But both of them also had stopped making the kind of stuff that I loved. You know, like Stan Lee obviously was awesome, and he did the cameos in the Marvel movies and stuff, but he wasn't actively making comic books. Whereas like Toriyama was still doing his thing. Kentaro Miura, like Connor's comment said, is like, I'm not as into Berserk, so it didn't hit me in that way the same way, but it did just hit really hard thinking about that, like that story, which I know they're continuing. I haven't read any of the new manga stuff since he passed. I know that they've got like other people that knew him and were, you know, his collaborators are continuing that series based on outlines and stuff he made. But that one hit really hard because there was just a sense of that work is never going to truly be finished the way that it feels like it should have been. And Berserk is so important in the kind of dark fantasy world that one had that one hit pretty hard as well.
Yeah. And it's to the credit of the people who've kept it going. I've seen good reactions to the
Yes.
It sounds like it's a very, you know, heartfelt attempt to continue it. And we'll see some similar things. Not totally analogous with Toriyama, because his overall contribution was finished in the sense of his kind of solo work, but you know, Daima is going to have to be finished without him, all that kind of stuff. So We'll see how that goes on. Yeah, and I was thinking, you know, the other celebrity death that I in some sense have never gotten over is one of my favorite voice actors, and this is a Dragon Ball thing, because this is where I met him, is Daisuke Gori, who voiced in Dragon Ball Enmadayo. He voiced the Ox King, Chi-Chi's dad, and Mr. Satan. And he is one of my favorite voice actors ever. And even just the other night, I was listening to those early episodes of Kai. He died early in the run of Dragon Ball Kai. That was his final voice work. Like before we got to Mr. Satan, so he never voiced Satan in that. But like every time I hear his voice, I get just a little pang, because it is truly one of my favorite anime voices of all time. He also died suddenly. He committed suicide. It was very, very sad. So that would be another one. But yeah. Honestly, there's a lot of Dragon Ball people. That is one thing I want to talk about a little bit. A lot of the original Dragon Ball crew is gone. You know, Hiro Mitsuru, who voiced Bulma, Joji Nakata, who was the original narrator in Kaio-sama, Shinsuke Kikuchi, who did the music. It's been a rough couple of years for Dragon Ball. All right, let's see. Levi on Twitter said, I'm sure there's stuff he worked on in some capacity that's yet to come out, like the Sandland game, but Dragon Ball Super Superhero being his final work before his passing is an incredible final act he never missed. I agree with that. Superhero is either my favorite or second favorite Dragon Ball movie, and absolute pure Toriyama genius on the scripting side. And yeah, absolutely great final act as it turned out.
Yeah, I second that completely. Like it is, again, it's one of those things that makes the loss hit so much harder is because he was still regularly putting out stuff that was so good, and his influence was still so directly and keenly felt on what Toei was doing with Dragon Ball.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last one I have here is from Misa on Twitter. I don't consider myself a huge fan. I dropped off after GT. But growing up and visiting Mexico with family, my elder cousins were super into it. The amount of DBZ collectibles they had and how much they talked about it was amazing. His work crossed so many countries. Rest in peace. And yeah, that's one of the coolest things. If you've ever heard any of it, the Mexican-Spanish dub of Dragon Ball Z has always been considered like one of the best dubs that series got in any language. It was much more faithful than the Funimation dub. Like, it didn't replace the music. It had a more faithful script, and people love that one. And, that's just one of dozens of countries where Dragon Ball was absolutely huge. It as they say, just so many cultures it crossed over into. I think we've had multiple heads of state talk about Toriyama, like Emmanuel Macron in France. I think several people in South America. It's huge.
Yeah, like that's one of those big things. And again, it's for me, since as a teacher, I'm like, as a teacher, and specifically as a white teacher at a school that serves a predominantly Hispanic population, and then, the two highest like ethnic demographics that students at my school are Hispanic and African American. So it's like those communities, and particularly young boys in those communities, like Dragon Ball is so popular still, and partially because of like what that comment was saying, where even if you yourself are not into it, you've got an older brother, or you've got a cousin, or at that age you have your dad, right? Like there are people, they're like male role models and stuff like that in their lives, that Dragon Ball is such a kind of like strong connection point, in the kind of way that like a Star Wars or like that might be for a different family, right? Dragon Ball serves like that kind of foundation. And so it is a thing that like I feel like it helps me connect to them on like on a more personal level, like with them. And then also some of the male Spanish teachers at my school. That's like both all of my colleagues, because we're in the English teachers are in the same hallway as the foreign language teachers at the school I work at. And so I've got two different male Spanish teachers who are both from Mexico. And so that is a thing that, like, if I have an opportunity, I will chat with them about anime, and specifically, usually that conversation will end up on Dragon Ball. So yeah, it is a thing that it transcends all sorts of cultural boundaries in a way that's really incredible, that like almost nothing ever does. Like almost nothing reaches that status. And also like reaches that status while feeling like something very personal to the people who care about it. Like it's not some sort of like more abstract thing like the World Cup or something where, there are obviously like maybe 1 billion plus people on the planet that love soccer in the World Cup and stuff like that. But they're associated with like, I've got my team, I've got my football club, right. And it's like a little bit more like divided. It's like Dragon Ball is a thing that unites everybody because everyone has this very personal love for this specific thing and these specific characters.
Absolutely. Final question. This is complete happenstance, but as we started recording, Sean, I got a text from my friend Parker, who is another PhD candidate in the department here at Iowa with me, and he said, "Hey, I'm interested in the Dragon Ball films and have a lot of time to watch stuff this week while doing petty menial paperwork and grading. Is there a viewing order for films or chronology of release or anything I should know about the surrounding media before watching?" And I told him, you know what? I'm gonna talk about this on the podcast, and I'll get back to you. So that's a good question. If you wanted to get into it, if you wanted to watch some Dragon Ball stuff, he said films. I think we have to correct that it is primarily a TV show, although we could recommend movies. Number one, if you just want to understand Dragon Ball, is read the manga. That's the easiest one.
And that's the fastest, you can it's, a relatively long manga. I mean, it's, it's not certainly not the longest. But man, you can blast through that thing so fast.
If you wanted to dip your toes in and see if it is to your liking, a couple of ideas. The 1996 10th anniversary movie, The Path to Power, where Goku is in his blue gi, but it retells with some changes the early arcs of Dragon Ball, is a great little 80-minute movie, and I think a good, kind of get your feet wet version of Dragon Ball in its original form. if you don't want to commit to an avalanche of hundreds of episodes of anime, Dragon Ball Kai is not my favorite version of Dragon Ball, but particularly if you want to watch it in English, avoid the original dubs like the fucking plague. They're jokes. But the English dub of Dragon Ball Kai is totally fine, and in some places very inspired, like when you get to Frieza. And so I would absolutely... I actually don't even know where Kai is streaming these days, or if it is, but if it's out there, just start there. That's how... It's the Z part of the series that we all started with, and it'll get you there faster. And again, if you want to watch it in English, I would always recommend Japanese. But if you want to watch it in English, that is the place to go. The original dubs are very bad, but the Kai dub is very good.
Yeah, it looks like Kai is on Hulu, based on my Googling.
Interesting. So, yeah, you could seek that out. And that's Kai, its original run is 98 episodes. And then there is the... final chapters Boo Arc one that I don't think anyone would recommend for several different reasons. But although again, if in English, that is where they got to do the Boo Arc right. So, there you go.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. I mean, I also do think that like original Dragon Ball, the anime version, does not have some of the issues that the Dragon Ball Z anime has in terms of filler. Like, there's a couple of filler episodes here or there, but it's like a single filler episode where Goku goes saves some random 8-year-old girl. That's what all of them are in the original Dragon Ball. I don't know why that's the plot always do. But there's just a bunch of really adorable little 8-year-old girls that Goku has saved.
There's also some really good filler in original Dragon Ball. Yes. Like, it fleshes out some of the early Red Ribbon Army stuff in such a way that I remember when I first watched that anime, I couldn't tell if this was manga material or not, because it matches pretty well. And that one is on Crunchyroll in decent quality. Z is not. Z on Crunchyroll is the cropped, smeared, awful Funimation re-release. Mm-hmm. But original Dragon Ball is fine. With any of these, go sail the high seas and find like one of the Seed of Might releases where they've got the broadcast audio and they've color corrected and all sorts of great stuff. Go find those. But original Dragon Ball is awesome.
Yeah, and I think is like a little bit more palatable to a modern audience than the Dragon Ball Z anime, which I love the original Dragon Ball Z anime to death. But also, if I'm watching it, I know when I get the Garlic Jr. saga, I know I ain't watching this shit. Or like I might kind of fast forward through here's like Bulma is in Frog Ginyu's body and Ginyu, like that shit you just don't you don't need to deal with. But if you're a new viewer, you're not going to know that, and the pacing's going to be so slow. So like I think it's totally viable to do like original Dragon Ball and then Kai for Dragon Ball Z, especially as you say for if you're doing English, Kai I think is mandatory. I've never watched the Japanese version of Kai, but I assume that that's also like a totally fine way to do it if you want to get that more cut down, streamlined version of it. But I also do want to echo what you said, Jonathan, about the Path to Power movie, that I think that would be a good thing for someone to watch just to like kind of see if they're into it. If like you watch that movie, you're like, you know what, this was pretty cool. I think that gives you a sense of that you might want to go in deeper, because also it's so accelerated in terms of the storytelling of that kind of first arc that I don't think it would feel tedious to then go watch that same story in a slower package in the TV show.
Yes. And Parker, if you're listening, I have DVDs of all of this. For some of them, I have multiple DVDs. I had these out for a different purpose before Toriyama died, but I have on my desk 3 different copies of Dragon Ball Z Movie 1 Dead Zone, which is also one of my favorites. You can borrow any of these. You probably don't want the Blu-ray because it doesn't have subtitles. But, all of them, I've got a whole Dragon Ball library of DVDs that people who know me are free to borrow. There are good options. Parker and our friend Chris and I do a Kung Fu movie club every Tuesday night where we watch different Kung Fu movies. We recently did a run of Michelle Yeoh, Yes Madam, and not Heroic Trio, Royal Warriors. That's a different one. Royal Warriors is great. And I said, I think I'm going to have to bring a Dragon Ball movie to Kung Fu Club in honor of Toriyama. And my idea is that I'm going to bring Super Broly. Because I think even if you don't know Dragon Ball, I think you could watch Super Broly. And if you want some good fucking animated action, oh yeah.
Yeah. Or, so another thing you could do is you could just watch the movies. Like this is the thing that when I watched the Naruto movies, a fun game I played with in my head was trying to imagine if you're someone who did not know anything about Naruto and you didn't even know that there was a manga or TV, if all you thought was it was the series of animated movies and that's what was it, how would you interpret these movies? Like, it was a really fun way to, like, the back of my head to kind of, like, look at it from a different perspective. Like, how would you... Like, what would you understand the reason why Sasuke is just all of a sudden not in the movies for, like, 4 of them because he's turned into a bad guy in the show? And, you know, that would be a very fun way to watch Dragon Ball, especially because you would start with the original Dragon Ball movies, which are fucking crazy and absolutely fucking bonkers.
Because the original 3 Dragon Ball movies are a retelling of arcs that get progressively weirder until the 3rd one, Mystical Adventure, or it's called Makafushigi Adventure in Japanese, it's the Tenshinhan saga, but now Chaozu is the emperor of a foreign country and Tenshinhan is his bodyguard, and it gets super fucking weird.
Yeah, so I would love to know what someone would think if, like, all you did was watch those movies. How would you understand the characters? How would you understand the continuity? You know, because, like, you know, they introduce most of the characters. I think you are going to hit a point where all of a sudden, like, Vegeta is here and nobody's ever going to tell you who the fuck a Vegeta is, or Trunks. You know, once you get to that point, they're not really introducing the characters. But, you know, you could get, I think, a bit into those and still kind of generally follow it. At a certain point, I think it would just kind of break your brain. But that would be very funny.
No, to Parker specifically, you just want to watch a couple of movies. I think, you know, The Path to Power would be my number 1 from those. From the original run of movies, I do think those original 3 Dragon Ball movies are great, and they're very weird and fun. The first 3 DBZ movies, Dead Zone, World's Strongest, Tree of Might, are a good little trilogy. If you want to get to know the characters and action style, those all do that.
Yeah, I think Dead Zone in particular is probably very watchable without a lot of background knowledge.
They also, if you're like me and are an obsessive collector, I have the old DVDs that have the earlier dub, that it's not exactly the cast from the original Ocean version of the show, but it's the first one they ever did where it was uncut, and it's actually a really good dub of these couple of movies, so that's worth it too if you wanted to watch it in English. So yeah, there's good choices all around, and, you know, I think Battle of Gods, Resurrection F, Super Broly, all of those are a little bit more kind of in the weeds for fans, but in a way that I still think you could, particularly the Broly one, because it's from Broly's POV, is kind of welcoming to newcomers.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Dragon Ball Super Broly is a pretty easy one to watch, because it's just, at a certain point, it is just like the most incredible action scene you have ever seen in your life, animated. Yes. And so even if you're maybe a little bit confused by who some of the characters are because you haven't seen the show, at a certain point you can kind of turn your brain off and just enjoy the spectacle of it and the crazy soundtrack and all that shit going on.
And then eventually you go back to the manga and read that and go, when does the crazy cat god guy appear? We're like, oh, he's never in the manga. He's in Battle of Gods. As we continue introducing new gods. Another thing we haven't mentioned today, my love of Toriyama's god pantheon that is never ending, and there's always more. And I am sad now that he is gone that we'll never learn which god was above Zeno. Because of course there would have been one, right? Eventually.
Yes. Super Zeno.
Yes. Or Zeno is one of the 13 Zenos who just, you know, there's just, of course there's more. Of course there's more. All right.
Although, Jonathan,
Sean,
if you want to bring a movie to your Kung Fu movie night, I mean, there is one Dragon Ball movie that stars, you know, one of the greats of Hong Kong cinema. That's also a perfect jumping on point. You wouldn't need anything, no background knowledge required whatsoever to watch the James Wong classic starring everybody's favorite actor. You might also know him from Doctor Who, Return of Dr. Mysterio, Justin Chatwin himself, as our favorite character, Goku.
In Dragon Ball Evolution?
Yes, in Dragon Ball Evolution. You should watch... You should it's actually, it's a hard thing. That sentence, you should watch the title of that movie, that's a hard sentence to actually say to someone with a straight face.
All right, I'm going to cut over to the part where we talk about Dragon Ball story arcs and celebrate this series we love for part 2 of today's show. Akira Toriyama, we love you. We miss you. On behalf of humanity, we apologize for Dragon Ball Evolution. And in heaven, I hope you are able to transcend it.
Yes, rest in peace.
All right, so next up on our 10th anniversary podcast spectacular, we are going to be talking about one of our favorite anime franchises that isn't Gundam. It's Dragon Ball. We have not gone so far with Dragon Ball as to have our own separate, weekly suit Dragon Ball, but we have talked about it quite a bit on the podcast, and so it has earned one of the 10 slots in this weird 10-hour podcast we're doing, and we are going to be ranking all of the Dragon Ball story arcs.
Yes, it's a franchise we both love dearly that's been with us for basically ever. And we don't have like a lot of opportunities to do like Dragon Ball focused episodes, particularly, there's the new movie coming out and stuff, but it's, Dragon Ball project's a little few and far between, and there's not a lot of opportunities to go back and look back at the totality of the franchise. So I think ranking all the story arcs is just a good way to kind of look at and talk about this thing that we both love so much.
Yeah, and Dragon Ball was my introduction to manga, and then wasn't like the first anime I ever saw, but one of my first. It was the first anime I ever watched in Japanese, I can tell you that. Huge introduction to me there. Dragon Ball, I know, was one of the first anime things you ever saw. I was a huge fan of forever.
Yeah, in the Toonami days. And then it's the first manga I read through in its entirety in Japanese also. So that's it is a lot of milestones for me in a couple different ways.
People have probably seen pictures, because I tweet it out every once in a while when I update it, my fucking Dragon Ball shelf that I have. And I say shelf, it's a bookcase. It's an entire bookcase that is just Dragon Ball stuff. And one day I might downsize it, because it does take up a lot of room. Because I have the whole manga in Japanese, I have the whole manga in English, I have DVDs for everything, I have Blu-rays of a lot of it. And a lot of it, that stuff I don't even watch, because there's now better versions on like fan torrents that are my preferred versions of most of that stuff now. So we both like Dragon Ball.
Yeah, we both like Dragon Ball a hell of a lot.
And when we were talking about topics for this 10th anniversary podcast, and the goal being to represent a lot of our favorite things and or things that come up on the podcast a lot, Dragon Ball kind of in that Venn diagram in the middle, I would say. We're thinking about what could we do with it, and Dragon Ball is one of, if not the only franchises where I think you and I could just off the top of our heads, without rewatching everything, just riff on, let's rank rank everything. And I think this is one of the rare ones we could do that with, and so that's what we're going to do today.
Yeah, like this is a podcast idea that needs no preparation at all. Like we both are so deeply familiar with like everything in Dragon Ball. That it's like, we could just jump into this. We could, you like, someone could have asked us to do this on the fly in any other random podcast recording, and we could have done it right there, then and there.
Yes. So the minimal prep I have done is I have laid out the arcs. We are going to begin this ranking project, Sean, with just the arcs from the manga. So the original 42-volume run of Dragon Ball, as written by Akira Toriyama. These are like the canonical, this is the Old Testament of what Dragon Ball is, right? And of course, then maybe we will, depending on how much time we have, we can go in and sprinkle in some of the different like anime filler arcs. We could ask ourselves, where do the different super arcs fit into this? All of that stuff. But let's just start, Sean, with the basic manga. And for the manga, here are the arcs as I've laid them out. We have the first arc, which you could call the Hunt for the Dragon Balls arc. I've just called it the Son Goku arc, which I think is the most common nomenclature for it now. But that would be the first 13 episodes of the anime, the first couple volumes of the manga, where they hunt for the Dragon Balls. Then there is the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai arc, which also includes all of Goku and Kuririn's training with Kame Sennin. So that big arc, the training in the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai. Then you have the Red Ribbon Army arc, which is a big one, which we could split up, but I think is fine left alone. And then there is the Uranai Baba arc. You could argue for those being one big mega arc, and they kind of are, because the hunt for the Dragon Balls ends with Uranai Baba, but I think they are separate enough, because he defeats the Red Ribbon Army, and then they go off and have the adventure with Uranai Baba. I think generally those are counted as two separate arcs. Do you think that's a good way for us to do it?
Yes. On the Japanese Wikipedia page, they have the Red Ribbon Army Hin, or like arc, as one big thing, and then they have the Fortune Teller Baba arc as its own thing. So yes, so going by the Japanese Wikipedia, that is how they label it there. So I think that is totally fine.
Then we have the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai. This is, of course, the one where we meet Tenshinhan and the Crane School and all of that good stuff. Great tournament arc. Then we have King Piccolo. Then we have, and I forgot to write it here, so I'll write it now. Then we have Piccolo Jr. So we have King Piccolo. Then we have Piccolo Jr., two Piccolos, Piccolo Jr. / 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai. So you have those. Then you have the like second 2/3 of the manga are just giant mega arcs.
Yeah.
You have the Saiyan arc. You have the Namek / Frieza arc. You have the Artificial Humans and Cell arc. And then you have the Majin Buu arc.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say, because I think this is how you should probably separate it out. This is always something that for me I think is like different for the way that I think about and feel about Dragon Ball than most people, is that honestly in my heart of hearts I don't think the Saiyan arc is a separate arc. I think that the Namek Frieza Saiyan arc is the big mega super arc in Dragon Ball, because the Saiyan arc isn't a true full resolution, because it's more about them than going off to Namek. And so that's in my heart of hearts, I don't really separate it out, but everybody separates it out. So I think we have to separate it out for our list.
I do separate it out, but I understand where you're coming from. I don't necessarily agree, but I do understand because that, you can make the argument that the Saiyan arc starts with Goku learning he is from outer space and is a Saiyan, and ends with him ascending, becoming Super Saiyan, and deciding to live off in outer space. And so there is kind of a full circle to that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like the way I think of Dragon Ball Z is that it's 3 big arcs, right? And with like big chunks of time that separate the arc where everything is reset to a new status quo. And like the Saiyan arc doesn't satisfy that criteria, right? But after the Frieza arc, there's a big jump in time with a new status quo. After the Cell stuff, there's a big jump in time with new status quo. And so it's like, I always feel like that to me is like the thing that actually separates those story arcs in Z. And since Saiyan doesn't like fit that, it just always feels like it's kind of like this weird sort of mini arc that is setting up all the Namek Frieza stuff.
And that is fair. It's not necessarily how I would separate it, but I think this is a compelling take that you have given us, Sean.
Yeah, I just felt like I needed to put it out there just because it's just for me how I see it. But again, like even if you agreed with me that like they were one big story arc, I would still say that we should separate it out because it's what everybody does.
So now that we're going to think about how to rank these, the first thing I want to say is I love all of these.
Yes,
there is not an obvious worst arc in Dragon Ball in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I think they are all good. There are things I love about all of them individually. There are ones that I have a stronger preference for. I think I know what my number 1 would be. I could not off the top of my head tell you what the lowest one would be for me. So I'll tell you that to start.
Yeah, I think I have got a very clear personal top like 3 or 4. I was going to say top 3, and then I realized my Saiyan arc thing again. I was like, wait, no, that makes it a top 4 because that's the separate thing. But I think I know what those are. And I'm with you that like, I think it's hard to pick out a like worst one because I think it's less that like there are any bad arcs and there are more arcs that I think have like inconsistent quality in certain places that make it less like sort of like perfect feeling or something. But there aren't any ones that I look at and be like, that wasn't a very good arc. All of these I look at them like, man, that was a great time. I love that one.
Yes. I do not think there's like and none of them, like the bottom of this list is not a bad arc. There is not a like, here's the bad one, here's the good ones. They're all really good. We have 3, 6, 9, 10, 11 overall that we are ranking. So, Sean, let's just start on the positive end. What would your pick for number 1 be?
I don't want to say like exactly what number 1 would be because I still have to think it up. I'll tell you these are like my favorite arcs. What I think like I would pick it from this set would be Piccolo Jr., Namek Frieza, Cell, and then Saiyan arc. I don't think I wouldn't make Saiyan arc number 1, but it's like up in that like upper tier. Like that block basically from the end of what in the anime you'd say is Dragon Ball through all the Cell stuff is to me the strongest section of Dragon Ball as a whole thing. Particularly the manga version of the Frieza arc pushing that up a lot higher than the anime one because I think the manga version of the Namek Frieza stuff is a significant better version than what the anime had because of filler and pacing and stuff like that.
I generally agree with all of that. Those would be my top 4 as well, looking at these. My number 1 is Artificial Humans and Cell.
Okay.
In a walk. That's my number 1. And my number 2 is probably Piccolo Jr. 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai. But I would generally agree our top 4 are going to be these 4 in some order.
Yeah. Like, I'm very torn on, like, whether I would want Frieza or Cell to be number 1. Like, Can
I make my argument?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a lot to recommend any of these. There's no wrong answer here. why it has always been for me, and like even on my most recent like rewatch of the anime, I think this really drove it home, in part because I think the anime version of the Cell arc is also really good. It's got a couple of weak points, but it is one of the strongest stretches of Z where even some of the filler is fairly good. So it's not like the Frieza arc that gets kind of diluted in the anime, but in either version. And some of this, I will admit, is a little bit, I started reading the manga in the midst of the Cell games, and that was the first stuff of the anime I saw, so I just have a strong nostalgic attachment. But the most recent time I went through all of this, I really was struck by the artificial human stuff. Starts with, you know, Trunks coming from the future, one of the great, like, twists in the history of anime. You know, he's Vegeta's kid, all of that stuff. It is such a just electric, incredible, you know, opening and kickoff of, like, there's these androids coming to Earth, Goku's gonna die, everyone's fucking dead, I'm the last one alive. Great beginning. And then it somehow, I think, gets even better from there, where you have, it's incredibly twisty, and it, you know, could, if Toriyama were a less talented writer, it could come off as so needlessly convoluted. But I think the movement between the androids onto Cell and then the different incarnations of Cell, it is a plot that just keeps moving. It showcases the entire cast in such incredible ways. It's got such a good, like, through line, I think, with Gohan, who is overall probably my favorite character in the manga, and his overall arc as a character. You know, it leads to some of the absolute best moments Toriyama ever wrote or the anime ever created, certainly with Gohan going Super Saiyan 2 being maybe the best thing the anime version ever did. You know, to me, most of my favorite moments in Dragon Ball are concentrated in this arc, and I think as an overall piece of storytelling, it is so propulsive, it moves so fast, it never stays on one thing to the point where it gets boring or overstays its welcome, and I think it ends on the highest of high notes. This, to me, is peak Dragon Ball.
Like, if I was going purely on the anime, I would 100% agree that I think the Cell arc / like the android artificial human arc like is easily the best one in the anime sense. But when I read through the manga, there's something about the Namek Frieza stuff. And again, like, part of it, it's a little bit hard for me because in my heart of hearts, it's like the Saiyan stuff is a part of it also. But like the Namek Frieza dynamic, particularly with like characters like Vegeta, of the way that the world of Dragon Ball is like so exploded out into this like weird, crazy sci-fi thing that obviously continues with the rest of like the quote unquote Z material, but kind of starts here, and gets so like exotic and strange, and seeing this sort of like uneasy alliance between Krillin and Gohan and then Vegeta as they're doing all these like this weird like sort of like political maneuvering with the Frieza forces in trying to get the Dragon Balls, and the tactics on manipulating the Dragon Balls and getting them to one place and keeping them from another person and all of that. Like that sort of opening gambit of the Namek stuff is so compelling and so unique in the scope of Dragon Ball, where it is like the rare instance where it feels like Toriyama has actually like very like thoroughly planned everything, and it's like every thread is like really set up intentionally. It is pulled off very intentionally in this very kind of masterful broader stroke. And then that all culminates in the Frieza stuff, which I think the fight is still a little bit overlong in the manga version, but the manga version like improves so much on the pacing of the anime one, where it does give me this sensation of that like it is the pinnacle like ultimate fight against the big bad guy is what the Frieza fight is. Of like it's kind of like the same model that Kimetsu no Yaiba uses, but just in a much more efficient degree of like every single step and like push you make keeps on getting thrown back in your face, because Frieza always has something else, is always pulling out another card, and it takes like so much to get over that hill. And when getting over that hill is Goku becoming Super Saiyan for the first time, which is to me like the transformative moment of like this era of the franchise, and just like completely changed the scope of what Dragon Ball was when Goku becomes Super Saiyan and culminates like his character arc and all the stuff that started in the Saiyan stuff. It has one of the best scenes in all of Dragon Ball, which is Vegeta's death here and him passing the torch to Goku, someone who has never really understood or doesn't even want to lay claim to the Saiyan heritage, but sees how much it matters to this person that Goku like knows is the kind of bad, but respects so much as a fighter that he takes on that mantle and stands up against Frieza. And then all the whole climax of the Frieza stuff involving these like very particular mechanics of the Dragon Balls and like Guru coming back to life and all of that happening. There's something I really love about it. Feels like a full climax of the franchise because it all comes back to where everything began. It all goes back to the root of the Dragon Balls, and it's like the last time it felt like the Dragon Balls were like really meaningfully central to the mechanics of the franchise and the series as it sort of like moves and transcends into this other stage. And that is, to me, the kind of thing that gives me the impulse to want to say Namek and Frieza is number one, because to me it is the thing that when I think of Dragon Ball off the top of my head, I'm probably going to think of something involving that era of the show and those moments, because it is, to me, like the defining core of when you move into this kind of Z era, what like all the best elements of Dragon Ball all kind of combined into one.
I totally see where you're coming from on that. You're definitely right. The Dragon Balls themselves, the thing that give this series its title, were never better used than in the Namek stuff, because we've had a couple of Dragon Ball Hunt arcs in the manga up to here. The first arc of the manga and the Red Ribbon Army are both big Dragon Ball hunts. King Piccolo has a little bit of that going on in there. But then this one, because it's in space, which is cool enough, it's surrounded by, as you say, this massive expansion of the lore, and the Dragon Balls become, like these political pawns on the chessboard that keep getting moved around, and you have all of these different players. And I do think one of the coolest things about the Namek arc is the sense of, because Goku is absent from it for so long, it's Kuririn and Gohan as these utter fucking underdogs working among like literal giants who they have absolutely no possibility of defeating and have to hold out until the very last minute. The Saiyan arc obviously does that as well and does it in very interesting ways, but it doesn't have that same sense of like movement and momentum through a world that I think Namek and Frieza arc does.
Yeah, and I think the Saiyan arc, because it doesn't feel like it's a full proper conclusion, like it doesn't kind of have like that send-off note that Goku, like Namek exploding, Goku going, and all of that, and then them finding out that Goku is still alive out there somewhere. It's one of the things about Dragon Ball where there's like 5 or 6 places over the course of the franchise that if they had decided to stop, it would have been a totally perfect ending. And that would certainly, like, that would be one of them. Obviously, the end of the Cell arc also would have been a perfect ending if they decided to stop there. One other thing I'll say about the Frieza arc, and again, this is a lot of, like, the last big experience I had with all these stories was reading through the manga, which I have now read through twice in Japanese. So it's like very much what is most fresh and kind of what I think of now with these stories, is that when you look at the like arcs of Dragon Ball, there's this kind of like repeated attempt at telling something that I think that the Frieza arc fully like sort of coalesces, which is that how do you use the Dragon Balls as a central mechanic in a dramatic story? And so you get it a little bit in the first arc, then you get it like really developed in the Red Ribbon Army arc, and then you get it like more focused in the King Piccolo arc. But it's like those arcs, particularly Red Ribbon Army and King Piccolo, are all moving through the same basic plot archetypes, trying to sort of like fully crack open this story. And then especially if you bundle in the Saiyan stuff with the Namek and Frieza stuff, but even if you don't, like the Namek and Frieza arc like fully cracks what to me is that kind of like core story that Toriyama was making multiple passes at and kind of refining as he went through and building out the more dramatic side of the series. And the Namek Frieza is like the full culmination of that kind of story, so much so that then like the Cell and Majin Buu stuff did, like, they borrow some similar plot archetypes, but they don't do the exact same things with the Dragon Balls and that sort of central mechanic that the early Dragon Ball arcs were doing.
Right, because the Dragon Balls in the Frieza arc are like an active force in the story. Yeah. They are not a get-out-of-jail-free card, which is what they become in the final, like, half of Z, is like they're the thing that you call on when you have to reverse something. You know, people like to make fun of, you know, death not mattering in Dragon Ball and all that stuff, and there's a certain point, like in the Buu arc, where it does become very trivial. But the thing about the Saiyan arc to the Frieza arc is that getting those deaths reversed takes an entire arc's worth of effort, and that's what makes it feel so earned. You know what I mean? And the Red Ribbon Army does that in microcosm a little bit too, because you have like the dad who he wants to save.
Yeah,
Goku
the bottom
of
the Korin's tower.
Right. Yeah. The people who are like coded as Native Americans. I don't know how else you would describe that. And then I think the Namek and Frieza arc does it really well. You know, I don't want to leave out how fucking phenomenal the Saiyan arc is here too, because it is, as you say, it is less resolved because it kicks right off into the Frieza arc. But I do think just there's a tightness to that arc in both the manga and the anime, I think. And the anime expands it in the middle section with Gohan. I like that more than you do, I think. But, you know, whatever the case, it is still relatively tight for the anime of, Raditz coming to Earth, Goku and Piccolo, who were just enemies, teaming up, Goku dying, going off to the other world, everyone back on Earth having to prepare, scraping through this fight with Nappa, and then Goku comes back and kicks Nappa's ass. Vegeta kills him. They have this knockdown, drag-out fight that ends with Goku not really winning, but them all working together enough to a stalemate, and then they kind of pick up the pieces. It is just an incredible piece of storytelling.
Yeah, it is. I do think that, like, it having this sort of, like, weird ending where things don't feel fully resolved kind of hurts it for me if you separate it out. And if I'm being totally honest, there's something about, like, the Great Ape stuff in that arc that just, like, doesn't speak to me in terms of, like, Dragon Ball action that I've, like, it's not bad, but it's not as compelling to me as like, the Frieza stuff or the Android and Cell stuff in terms of, like, the mechanics of the fights. There's something about when they turn into Great Apes, it just sort of, like, the choreography of the fight kind of just sort of breaks down and it becomes a little bit less interesting to me in that regard. And that's also that's always something that has kind of, for me personally, knocked the Saiyan arc a little bit below those others in my personal estimation.
I can buy that, and I think I agree. And speaking of fights, while we're talking about these top four and how we're going to arrange them, the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai is one of the best parts of Dragon Ball because it has the best fighting in all of Dragon Ball.
Yeah.
There are multiple, like, Kuririn and Goku have an incredible fight in this one. You have multiple other great pieces of storytelling. You have Piccolo Jr., making a meal out of multiple fighters along the way. You have Kami-sama coming down, becoming a human as Shen, and a lot of cool stuff going on there.
Yamcha gets to show off the best move in the whole show that's, like, super effective, and it totally, he does his little Spirit Ball Sokidan thing, and it's like, man, good job, Yamcha. You still didn't get past the first round, though, huh?
Yeah, poor Yamcha still doesn't get past the first round, but the Sokidan is very cool. And then it culminates in the best fight in all of Dragon Ball. I will take no debate on this. Yeah. Piccolo Jr. versus Goku is the best fight in Dragon Ball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, it even does the, like, giant thing with Piccolo that I think, like, that version of it is way more interesting to me than, like, Vegeta turning to the Great Ape. Like, it feels like it fits into the choreography and the mechanics of the fight much more interestingly with him, like, swallowing Goku, and Goku gets the little, like, bottle or whatever that Kami has been trapped in. That I think without a doubt the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai is the best tournament arc in Dragon Ball. It's one of the best tournament arcs in any anime or manga, and it is if you want just, like, the concentrated tournament format, it doesn't really get better than that. So it is the peak of, like, that kind of more classic Dragon Ball era, while also having shades of the slightly more dramatic stuff you get in Z.
Yes, and it is also a character culmination for early Goku, where Goku has kept trying to win this tournament, and he finally does it. But there's also other evolutions. That's where we meet adult Goku. There's a certain kind of shift in his characterization. It's where Chi-Chi comes back into the story and they get married. It's just an embarrassment of riches.
Yeah, it's a great arc. So I think...
All right.
Yeah, so these are clearly our top four.
Are we saying Saiyan Arc is number 4 out of these? It sounds like that's where we're going. I think
so. That's where I would put it personally out of these.
Okay. Then how do we break? It seems like then maybe 23rd Tenkaichi is 3rd because neither of us claimed it as number 1.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. That's fine. Then how do we break the 2-1 logjam here?
I think I'm fine with having Cell, because obviously, like, the Cell arc is, if it's not my number 1, it's my number 2. And I think there is something about, if you're separating out the Namek Frieza stuff from the Saiyan stuff, like, I think it does weaken that arc, like, if you're breaking down out those considerations. Whereas, like, the artificial human / Cell stuff is much more focused, it is much more streamlined in its scope. And particularly if you're also considering how does the anime adaptations factor in, like, I mean, the best moment in the original Dragon Ball Z anime is easily Gohan going Super Saiyan 2. The way that's executed, if you are someone who is a dub person, which I get it, I grew up on the Toonami stuff, like, if you have not watched the original Japanese version of that scene, like, fucking, you gotta watch it, like, right now, because it's so incredible. And I mean, and all throughout the anime version of that arc in particular, of, like, from the beginning of the Trunks stuff, the Android 18 Vegeta fight, which is incredibly well done. The Android 17 Piccolo fight is so well done in the anime. Like, it is, as an adaptation, it is clearly superior. So I think for all those reasons, I would be happy putting it as number 1.
I would be very happy too. Another couple things in the anime's favor. Obviously, Frieza Ryusei Nakao is phenomenal in the anime. You also have Norio Wakamoto doing Cell, and the thing you get there also is the way Norio Wakamoto does the earlier versions of Cell is phenomenal. And I think one scene that is overlooked in the anime is when Piccolo meets Cell for the first time, and Cell is going around eating all those bodies, and he's making weird noises, and just there's a low key Lovecraftian horror to Cell, and Piccolo is the one who finds it. The anime stretch here is just chock full of great stuff. So I think that would be a good way to balance it out. And because I think the only other option, I think the way you would put Namek and Frieza at number 1 is if you made it a tie with the Saiyan arc and made those 1 and 2. But I think I'm happy with this, and obviously this is my preference, but I would be happy with these as our top 4.
Yeah, I'm good with this.
All right. What do we think comes at 5? I have one thought. I'd be curious what your thought is.
Okay. Float it.
Okay. My number 5, I think, would be the training in 21st Tenkaichi Budokai arc.
Interesting. I would personally put the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai of the 21st. If we were thinking about the different tournament arcs.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd be fine with that too. The 22nd is great because that's where you get a really good concentrated character arc with Tenshinhan, and it's one of the best enemies to friends stories in all of Dragon Ball. But it's very concentrated. Vegeta becomes an enemy to a friend over hundreds of chapters,
yes.
Right? The Tenshinhan one is one nice concentrated arc. The thing about the 21st is I just love the training with Goku. I love him meeting Kuririn. I love all the stuff with early Kame Sennin. And then I think that arc is not the best fight stuff, but it's very fun. And then I actually do think the fight with Muten Roshi and Goku, which ends with Goku becoming the Great Ape, is very well done. And especially the anime is just having a fucking blast here in that stretch. But it's true through all of Dragon Ball.
Yeah. I think for me, what kind of puts it below, and I think this is a little bit true, the first arc of the manga as well, is that I think Toriyama is still navigating the balance between how much of this is a gag manga and how much of it is an adventure story. And I think both the original arc and the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai arc don't fully nail that balance, and there is just moments that feel are too gaggy, and I would actually say that's true of some stuff in Red Ribbon Army as well, that go a little bit too gaggy and kind of break it a little bit, and the balance isn't all the way perfectly there yet, whereas the 22nd of Tenkaichi Budokai is it's the leanest, meanest arc in Dragon Ball. It just it gets in there, it does what it does, and it gets the fuck out. So I would, because that also, the 22nd is where you have the first Goku Krillin fight, which is one of the best fights in the whole fucking series.
Yes, no, I agree with that. I actually may have misremembered that as part of the 23rd when we were talking earlier, because do they fight in the 23rd? No, Krillin goes down to someone else in the 23rd. I was thinking of this fight.
Krillin gets taken out by Junior in the 23rd.
Yes, you're right. So no, I was thinking of the one from the 22nd. That is a great fight. I would be very happy with the 22nd at number 5. Is that where you want to put it?
Probably, yeah. Because that's where Yamcha gets his fucking leg broken, which is the most fucked up thing that has ever happened in Dragon Ball. So for those reasons, I would absolutely be fine with putting that at number 5.
Okay. Is there a number 6 for you? I guess I would probably vote for Training Arc, King Piccolo, or Majin Buu next.
I would put Majin Buu next personally.
Okay.
Looking at what we have left.
I think I would agree with that. Majin Buu is one of the most up and down stretches of Dragon Ball, but the ups are so high. I think it has been unfairly maligned over the years. I mean, because the Majin Buu arc, broadly writ, has the great Saiyaman stuff, which I love. Yeah. It's got it's an aborted tournament, but it is still kind of fun to come back into the tournament mindset there. You have young Trunks and Goten. You have some amazing battles. You have amazing characterization from Vegeta. One of the other best moments in the anime is Vegeta's death as Majin Vegeta. They just nailed it. It's great in the manga too, obviously. But yes, I love the Majin Buu arc.
Mr. Satan's entire arc is so incredible. Yep. It's definitely the thing with Majin Buu is that its highs are up there with the best stuff in the rest of the franchise. It's just it's so inconsistent in the between moments, and it just goes on too long. It's one of those where it just feels like Toriyama didn't know exactly how to get to the finish line, so there's too much fucking around with Gotenks and Vegito, and that just and Ultimate Gohan coming in. All that stuff is you needed to have maybe one or maybe two of those things happen, and too much of that happens in the kind of home stretch, and that's the major issue with Majin Buu. The rest of it is fucking great.
I agree, and I actually like this ranking. I like putting the 22nd Tenkaichi above Majin Buu because it's like
Yes.
a super concentrated thing. But I do think Majin Buu has so much good stuff; it should be in the top half. I would agree with that.
Yeah. All right.
Then where would we go?
So now at this point, I think my inclinations would probably be towards either the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai or King Piccolo. One of those two.
I think that's correct. I think I think those two are the next two in some order. The King Piccolo arc is very good. There's a lot of good stuff in it. I will admit it is one that sticks in my memory less than some other things, including that 21st Budokai.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is exactly. I mean, Piccolo Daimao is a great villain, if overshadowed a little bit by the Piccolo Jr., who would become a more dynamic figure in the series. But, this is where you meet God, you meet Kami-sama, you have, there's so much good stuff in it, obviously.
Yeah.
You have the deaths of Muten Roshi and... I mean, this arc starts with Krillin getting fucking capped off screen, which is a phenomenal beginning to a story arc.
Yeah, Krillin gets his neck broken off screen. Goku comes in and sees it and is enraged. The first time you've ever seen Goku, properly angry. Goku gets his ass kicked. Then he meets Yajirobe, who mysteriously has the exact same voice as Krillin, which is in the manga. That line is in the manga. So it's very specifically that Toriyama wanted to make sure that Mayumi Tanaka still had a role for a while on Dragon Ball while Krillin was offed.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's I think the thing with King Piccolo is It is both a little bit incomplete because I think it's sort of figuring out how that full story works, and then it also just gets overshadowed by the Dragon Ball Z stuff because it is such a Dragon Ball Z style arc, but it just doesn't know how to get the full scope of the story and how to exactly pace that yet. I think that's the thing that hurts the King Piccolo arc more than anything else.
But I'm talking myself into it, though, because there's so much good stuff. I love the entire Mafuba concept and Muten Roshi trying to do that and dying. And, the finisher of the King Piccolo arc of Goku with all his fucking limbs broken, flying through King Piccolo is one of the great moments in the history of manga and anime, right? It's just...
Yeah, it's one of those... It's, so iconic, it's just constantly referenced within the franchise over and over again in anime and, the video game moves and all that kind of stuff. And this
I'm talking myself into that as number 7, yeah.
Ten Shinhan gets his, sort of the culmination of all his stuff where he gets to become the good guy when everyone else is basically fucking dead. I'm fine with putting it at number 7. I'm not precious about the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai arc or anything.
Yeah, my initial instinct obviously was to have the 21st Tenkaichi higher because there is stuff I really love about it. But now that we're talking about it, I don't know. King Piccolo has, I think 7 and 8 for these works, where 7 is Piccolo and 8 is the training arc. Does that sound good?
That's good for me, yeah.
All right, then of what's left, now, here's the thing. I think looking at these last 3, I kind of feel bad about it, but I think the initial Son Goku arc would be my number 11, would be the lowest.
Yeah, I think that's probably... the thing that I think is tricky for me is I don't know how to rank Red Ribbon Army, because I think that is such a, weird arc that is so different over the course of it. It's so long.
Yes.
It changes so constantly, because it's effectively... And this is where, this is where a lot of people split this up into 3 different sections, because you have all the stuff with the tower at the beginning in the wintry land or whatever. Then you have all the General Blue stuff in the middle, and then you have all the Tao Pai Pai stuff at the end. The Tao Pai Pai stuff in the Red Ribbon Army section, and Goku coming in destroying the Red Ribbon Army, that's all some of my favorite stuff in original Dragon Ball. But the stuff in the wintry land in the General Blue stuff is so inconsistent that I think the worst stuff in Dragon Ball, if you're going by the manga, is probably some of the stuff with General Blue and some of the fights in that tower, where when I read the manga, I was shocked that there were a couple of beats in some of those moments that I had no memory of whatsoever. Not because it wasn't adapted in the anime, because they were still in the anime, but just because there's stuff in that section that is so unmemorable that it feels more like a Dragon Ball knockoff than Dragon Ball proper. And so that makes Red Ribbon Army very difficult for me to rank in this list.
These are all good points. The thing about the Red Ribbon, because I agree 100%, General Blue, if we put that out on its own, that's the worst arc in the manga. Mm-hmm. I do like the tower. I think the tower actually, and the tower and the intro to the Red Ribbon Army stuff is actually one of the few places I would say is an improvement in the anime. The anime has some stuff it does with the tower, I think with Android 8, and it adds a little bit of stuff that is technically filler, but I actually think improves the story in the early Red Ribbon Army era that I like. And then I agree with you on the Tao Pai Pai stuff, and I think in the manga, the high of seeing Goku rip through the Red Ribbon Army and destroy it and like get up to General Red is phenomenal. That's one of the best moments in the manga. I think overall I would put Red Ribbon Army at number 9, but I could see the argument for it being number 11 also, you know?
Yeah, it's easily the hardest one to rank. Because the thing with the like original arc of the story is that obviously it's the most different. It's like the most purely adventure one, and there are a few chapters in there that I think are like kind of whatevers. You know, I think the best example of where it feels like Toriyama hasn't fully figured out how to balance the adventure versus gag stuff is, and I like this moment because I just like Dragon Ball as a whole, but all the stuff with like Boss Rabbit and him getting sent up to the moon, like that whole section is so like, this is just a gag manga chapter stuffed into this adventure story in a way that like doesn't fully mesh with the rest of everything that's happened. So it's like so there's like a lot of weaknesses I think in that first arc, but it also is like the first arc, you know. So it's like so much of like the iconic moments of Dragon Ball happen there. And it's where you're getting introduced to the whole original concept and the Journey to the West stuff. Goku meeting Bulma, them meeting Oolong and Oolong's whole thing, then meeting Yamcha, the Pilaf gang, the sort of like genesis of everything and the humor in Dragon Ball, which is the first wish on the Dragon Ball being for a pair of panties. You know, it's like it's the core of where the franchise starts. So it is like painful to try to put it at the lowest, even if it is like easily one of the weakest, if not the weakest arc.
I don't know if it's even that it's weak, it's just less substantive. But it is still like, the other thing to say for it though is it is a really tight arc.
Yeah.
It moves through fast. I think it does phenomenal character work introducing you to all of these figures and the relationships between them. I love everything between Goku and Bulma here. I love Bulma's relative centrality in this arc.
Yeah.
She's, it is great. I think Yamcha becomes a very interesting foe/friend. I think the resolution, this could have been a little mini-series, and it's a nice little, gag manga adventure thing at the beginning there. The way Kame Sennin comes in, I love that. I love all the, if you watch this in the anime, it is an absolute parade of phenomenal legendary voice actors just walking in and killing it, and I think the anime adaptation is one of the strongest things the anime does. So I actually think I would not put the Son Goku arc at the bottom. I could also put that at number 9. I would be okay with that. And then the Red Ribbon and Uranai Baba being at 11 and 10. The Uranai Baba one is an interesting one to take out because as a tournament, I don't think it's super interesting. But it does have some really great character beats, including Goku getting to meet with his grandfather one last time with Son Gohan, which is the most effective moment of emotion with Goku in the entire series.
Yeah, it's the thing that's hard about the Uranai Baba stuff is like it's hard to rank entirely on its own because it feels like it's an epilogue, because that is effectively what it is. It's them getting the Dragon Balls so that they can bring the dad at the tower back to life and all that stuff. So it's where I think ultimately where I'm coming down is I kind of feel like Red Ribbon Army has to be at 11 just because it's the amount of inconsistency in the arc. Like if I think about if you sat me down and put all of these in front of me and said which one would you want to reread or rewatch, I would do the other two before I would do Red Ribbon Army, because for Red Ribbon Army to get to the good stuff you've got to go through a lot of like sort of not crap but like a lot of like the weaker parts of Dragon Ball to get to the stuff you really want to see with that arc.
I think you're correct on that. I agree with that. We'll put that at number 11. And then I think I'd put Goku at 9.
I would too, yeah.
Yeah. And then Uranai Baba at 10.
Yeah, I like that.
And that feels good to me. So let me put the numbers in here and then let's look at this. So we have at number 11, the Red Ribbon Army arc. At number 10, Uranai Baba. At number 9, the Son Goku / Quest for the Dragon Balls arc. Number 8, Training and 21st Tenkaichi Budokai. Number 7, Piccolo Daimao, King Piccolo. Number 6, Majin Buu. Number 5, the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai, a.k.a. Tenshinhan fucks up Yamcha's leg. Number 4, the Saiyan arc.
A.k.a.
Number 3.
Yamcha really gets fucked up in that one.
Number 3, the Piccolo Jr. / 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai arc. Number 2, Namek and Frieza. And number 1, the Artificial Humans and Cell.
I think that's a very good ranking.
I like this. I like this a lot. So now, with the 20 minutes we have remaining, let's look over everything in the anime and let's choose which ones we actually think are worth trying to add to this ranking. Is that fair? Because I don't think I want to add everything. Like, there's the solo training arc in Dragon Ball, which is 4 episodes of filler before the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai. We're not ranking
There's
that,
no like filler arc in Dragon Ball, original Dragon Ball, that's meaningful enough to be considered its own arc. The closest is the wedding dress stuff at the end, and that's so nothing, you know. It's
just a fun little one-off. It's fine. It doesn't.
Yeah, it's just there
matter
for them to build a little bit of time as they move into transition to Z.
Z has 2 filler arcs. Yeah. It has Garlic Jr. and it has the Afterlife tournament. Do either of those warrant a ranking for you? I mean, they would be at the bottom of.
Yeah, I mean, I would be just happy to put Garlic Jr. at the bottom, you know, because Garlic Jr. is fucking garbage. I mean, it's so terrible. When I did my complete watch through of Dragon Ball, I should append that. My mostly complete watch through of Dragon Ball Z in Japanese, where I was like, I need to just watch the original version of this show entirely in Japanese, at least once all the way through. And then I got a little bit of the Garlic Jr. arc, and I'm like, oh, this is fucking terrible. It's like the just most dreadful version of what a filler arc is. It is, to me, in my mind, when I think of bad anime filler arcs, the Garlic Jr. saga is what pops into my head.
It's pretty bad. There's actually some stuff I enjoy in Garlic Jr., but it's mostly bad. The Afterlife tournament is a fun little one. It would not rise above any of the 11 canonical arcs to me, but I do like some things in the Afterlife tournament.
I think that's for me, sort of, the platonic ideal is saying too much, but it's a good example of a filler arc where it's it's very slight, it's not super substantial, but it's just a couple of fun fights in a tournament format. You know, it's not Pycon or whatever is not the most amazing Dragon Ball character ever, but he's suitably he works for this quick little arc and for a couple of quick fights, and it's it just sort of fleshes out the whole Kai hierarchy and all that stuff. So it's not a drag to get through, versus the Garlic Jr. saga is needlessly long. The Garlic Jr. saga is also just kind of tonally unpleasant because it's all about your characters being sort of taken over mentally and Chi-Chi attacking Gohan and stuff. So it's also just not fun, whereas all the Otherworld or Afterlife tournament arc is just pleasant, just goofy fun Dragon Ball fights. There's no oh, we have to watch Chi-Chi punch Gohan in the face. That's not a great time.
The Afterlife tournament also contributes a little bit of lore building in terms of having the, Northwest, South Kai, all that stuff, and then the Grand Kai, which is never canonized in the manga, but also is not contradicted, so it works fine. Because Dragon Ball makes such a, frankly, kind of satire out of the different layers of bureaucracy of the Afterlife, I think the anime having its own extra intermediary layer is fun and is fine, right?
Yeah.
And some of those characters are cool. I do like the gag that the Grand Kai is an old timer who has a fucking boombox and is just rocking out.
Yeah, he's just an old rockhead. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. What do we do with Dragon Ball GT? Dragon Ball GT is 3 arcs. It's the baby arc, it's the little tiny terrible Super 17 arc, and it's the Evil Dragons arc. I don't think I've ever seen all of the Super 17 arc, even though it's short. It's been many, many years since I've seen Baby or Evil Dragons to completion. I don't know if I could really rank them, other than I will say I think Evil Dragons is the best part of GT, I think Super 17 is the worst part of GT, and Baby is in the middle, but I don't know how I would rank it with everything else.
Yeah, I think I would say that I would generally agree with how you would rank those arcs within GT. I think I would... I don't know how I would rank Super 17 relative to, say, Garlic Jr. I would say that the other GT arcs I would put above, say, the Garlic Jr. arc. Because there is stuff in it that's, not completely intolerable, Pan is good even if she should be way better than she is because she's a horribly underused character, but she's still a fun character. It's a good performance. Dragon Ball GT at least has Dan Dan Kokoro Hikare Teku, the new opening theme, which is absolutely
phenomenal
killer.
theme.
So it's, at least that's fun to watch every time. And it goes for some stuff because it is able to in a way that a filler arc like Garlic Jr. is not able to go for some stuff. Like, I'm not in love with Super Saiyan 4, but at least Super Saiyan 4 is a more interesting dramatic thing to happen in a story than the like kind of nothing that happens over the course of Garlic Jr., because nothing substantial can happen over the course of that story because it's just purely filler.
Yeah, and I like Super Saiyan 4. I think as a, sort of anime-only power-up, I think it's, pretty well done, and I think conceptually it's very cool. It's, that's a Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru original. He was the designer for that stuff. It shows a lot of his hallmarks, and I do think it's a cool visual design. The Evil Dragons arc is, like all of GT, uneven. I do think GT is a good ending. I think GT has a really interesting way it ends. I think, like, it goes for something, and it's very memorable. So that's why I kind of put the Evil Dragons at the end, because that is the part of GT that makes me feel something.
Yeah, because it's also, one day I would like, with the baby stuff, you have like the really truly awful opening stretches of like them trying to do adventure style Dragon Ball but not knowing how any of that works, and it's just hugely tedious. And the Evil Dragons arc doesn't have any of that shit in it.
One day I would love to have them make a series that is pan-centric, have Pan be your main character, but make it better than GT. That is something I want one day.
Yeah, Pan never doing a proper Kamehameha and never turning Super Saiyan over the course of the entirety of GT was like the most offensive thing to me as a Dragon Ball fan at 13 years of age, because I always thought she was such a cool character. It was like, and at like that time, I didn't even really frame it, I think, mentally as like, oh, it's sexist. Like, now, obviously, I know exactly all the reasons why that happened. At the time, I was just like, why doesn't she ever get to do any of the Dragon Ball character stuff? Like, why does she always have to get weirdly put into this, like, damsel in distress role? And then I got older and like, oh, of course, because it's sexist garbage.
Yes.
Also, they fuck up Trunks. That's the other thing with GT, is that their version of adult Trunks...
Yes, they fuck up Trunks.
It fucking sucks. It's not... Obviously, it's nowhere cool as Future Trunks, but it's not even a good idea for an older version of the Kid Trunks we know. So that's another sin of GT for me.
But overall, we've taken out 5 filler arcs / GT and kind of put them in a rough ranking here. None of them rise into the main 11.
No.
So we'll leave them there for now. Then there's Dragon Ball Super. Now, Dragon Ball Super has 3 anime original arcs that would be fairly easy to rank among everything else because they're just big Dragon Ball arcs. You have the Universe 6 versus Universe 7 tournament, you have the Future Trunks arc, and you have the Universe Survival arc. The problem is, you also have the Battle of Gods stuff and the Resurrection F stuff. Now, as movies, would you rank those as arcs? I don't know. But those movies are good, particularly Battle of Gods. The anime adaptations are fucking horse shit, and I think the Resurrection F arc might be in contention with Garlic Jr. for the worst thing Dragon Ball has ever produced.
Yeah, I think I would probably agree with that. But it's the kind of thing where it's like, it's weird to consider how you rank it, because if you're combining it with, if you're like balancing it with the movie, which is a lot better, like I like the movie's way better than watching the fucking Garlic Jr. saga, but I don't know how to tackle that.
Because if we do the movies, then we also have to do the Broly movie, Super Broly.
Yes.
Because so do we bring in the movies, or do we just ignore the movies for now? Or are the movies part of it?
I think let's just ignore the movies. Like, I'm almost inclined to just like ignore these arcs entirely, because like I don't know how you square the circle of like the anime TV thing with the movies, because it feels kind of unfair. It feels unfair to the story arc because it's not its fault. Like, the movie didn't decide to get turned into like a shitty anime TV show version of itself. But also, I don't know how you rank a movie next to these other like multi-episode or multi-chapter arcs. Because
that's my Okay, then for now, here's what we should do. Let's take these last 3 and see where we would put them. So Universe 6, Universe 7, Future Trunks, and Universe Survival. Universe Survival is the best of those, and I think is competitive with some of the stuff in original Dragon Ball.
100%.
Where would you put it?
Oh my god. I think I would actually put it relatively high. I think I would maybe put it at number 7.
Yes, that's actually where I was going to say. I would put it below Boo, but above King Piccolo.
Yeah, that's where I put it.
Okay, well, let's do it. Let's break the chain here. We're going to put it number 7, and then Piccolo becomes 8. I'll fix those numbers later.
Yeah.
Okay, so Universe Survival Arc right under Majin Buu. I mean, Universe Survival Arc, not perfect, obviously, but it is such a conceptually fun, different version of a tournament. It has so many good characters, it has so many good fights, and it has the coolest power-up in the series.
Yeah, it's got the coolest power-up, it's conceptually awesome, and it has what is one of the coolest things that has ever happened in any piece of media ever, which is Goku doing the sliding Kamehameha over Kefla's beam.
To Kefla,
is like one of the fucking just raddest things. I lost my shit completely when I watched that happen. Like, I remember that moment distinctly so much. Like, oh my god, that is the best piece of fucking choreography I think I've ever seen for something like a Dragon Ball show. So yeah.
I know there's some people who like to shit on that arc, and they need to answer me, what about the Kefla moment?
Yeah.
Anyway, Future Trunks is one I am so torn on.
Yeah.
Because if you ignore the final episode of Future Trunks, episode 76, it is so good. Mm-hmm. It is so twisty, and it really captures, I think, the feeling of the Cell arc in terms of the number of plot twists and the amount of lore being dumped on you, but in the best way possible. It is so propulsive. It is so imaginative. And the final episode is one of my least favorite things in all of Dragon Ball because of the way it just shits all over what that story is doing. It's really bad. Yeah. So overall, I'm not sure where I would put it. And then Universe 6 versus Universe 7 is just a super solid tournament arc. Like, it's not phenomenal, but it's really solid.
Yeah. Like, were I ranking these, like, within our list, I would probably put the Universe 6, Universe 7, like, at number 12 or whatever. I don't think it's as good as any of the original story arcs, but I think it's better than, like, anything in GT or any of the fillers or anything like that. Yeah. And I'm with you on Future Trunks is hard on where you would put it. Because I feel like it would break into the core list or whatever and mix it up with some of the original stories, but I don't know how far into that list it makes it because of like the way it ends, which I agreed like sucks a lot of like kind of the oxygen out of that arc.
I might go as far as 11, which would replace Uranai Baba, but not higher than the Son Goku arc.
I think I'm good with that. Yeah, I think like on balance, that makes sense to me.
Because also Future Trunks, the first episode of it is one of the best episodes Dragon Ball's ever made, where it's just Future Trunks in the future and everything falls apart and future Bulma dies and all of that. There's a lot of good stuff. Okay, that's 11.
You get Masuko Nozawa's performance as Goku Black, which is one of the most delightful performances in all of Dragon Ball. And just all the stuff, like, I think my favorite stuff in that arc, honestly, is the episode where Trunks just is, like, sort of, Future Trunks is trying to acclimate to the past that he was at, but now it's like 3 years further in that future or whatever, and so he like sees Gohan is happy, he meets himself as a little kid, and him sort of like getting to experience some of like the fruits of what he won in the climax of the Cell arc is very satisfying. Absolutely. I am ranking out the rest of these. I have put Resurrection F above Garlic Jr., because Resurrection F arc at least has Jocko in it. And Jocko the Galactic Patrolman is one of my favorites. It's true.
So so there you go. That's the one thing that I would put that above Garlic Jr. And I put the Battle of Gods anime above Super 17, but below the Afterlife tournament. I think that's a decent place to put it.
Yeah, if you're totally disregarding the movies, that's
what I'm doing.
Yeah. That's, I think, like a fair ranking for those. I'm very happy just to see Garlic Jr. be at the bottom because I truly just really hate that arc. Completely.
Well, there you go. And now I'm looking at it. Yeah, I could not rank the movies in here, the 3 Toriyama movies. I think that's too hard.
Particularly
they're all really...
if you get to like trying to figure out, because when you said you'd have to rank Broly, I was like, no, you don't. And then I'm like, well, no, that would make sense if you were trying to rank the other movies. And then I have absolutely no idea how you do Broly in particular. That would be like a weird thing to try to rank. It's like, is it actually number 1? Oh, that's crazy. What the fuck? How would you even rank that?
It's great, but it's a separate thing.
Yeah, it's a separate
These are long form. So I think what we're doing is we're ranking the Battle of Gods and Resurrection F anime arcs as long form arcs.
Yeah.
And as long form arcs, they are bad. As movies, Battle of Gods is great and Resurrection F is fine.
Yeah, it's a good time. It's not like a revelation or anything.
So, do you want to count these down with me, Sean? Starting at number 21. I will let you do the honors of number 21.
Okay. Number 21 in our ranking of the Dragon Ball arcs is Garlic Jr.
Number 20 is the Resurrection F anime version. Ugh.
Number 19 is the Super 17 arc of Dragon Ball GT.
Number 18 is the Battle of Gods, but we're on a boat, motherfucker, version of the arc.
Number 17 is the Afterlife Tournament from Dragon Ball Z.
It's fine.
Yep.
Number 16, Baby.
Number
from Dragon Ball
16,
GT.
baby. Number 15 is the Evil Dragon's arc from Dragon Ball GT.
AKA the one where Goku dies, but for real this time? Maybe? Question mark. Number 14, Universe 6 versus Universe 7, AKA Hit is pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. Number 13, the Red Ribbon Army arc. Hey, it had that Dr. Slump crossover, and that was pretty great.
Number 12, Uranai Baba, Goku meets his dad.
Yes. Number 11, the Future Trunks arc of Dragon Ball Super. Future Trunks is a good boy, and he deserves everything good in the world.
Masuko Nozawa's vocal performance makes me feel things I'm not entirely comfortable with. Number 10, the Son Goku arc.
Number 9, the Training and 21st Tenkaichi Budokai arc.
8, the Piccolo Daimao arc.
Number 7, the Universe Survival arc from Dragon Ball Super.
It's good, but we're going to get hate mail for that one. Number 6, the Majin Buu arc.
Number 5, the 26th Tenkaichi Budokai, sorry about the leg, Yamcha.
You meant 22nd.
22nd, yes, that one.
Yeah. Number 4, the Saiyan arc. Sorry about the body, Yamcha, and especially Chaozu.
I hope you enjoy your whole Yamcha, is what you deserve. Number 3, the Piccolo Jr. / Ma Jr. / 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai arc.
Number 2, Namek and Freezer.
And number 1, the artificial humans / android / Jinzo Ningen / Cell, but he's also actually an android / artificial human / Jinzo Ningen. So it's really just the artificial humans arc, what we are saying, the best arc in all of Dragon Ball.
There's a lot of good stuff on that list before you get to anything remotely bad.
Yes.
Dragon Ball is a very, very, very long-running franchise. It has had its ups and downs, but honestly, they've mostly been ups, especially if you're going for like the actual long-form stories. That's what makes Dragon Ball so wonderful.
I mean, if you're going for the core stuff, and especially if you're going by the manga, which I have to emphasize, if people listening to this have only ever done the anime, like really, you should go read the manga because it is incredibly good. And I had held off on it for a long time, and then eventually did it in Japanese. But obviously, if you read it in English, it's just as good. And yeah, it is like you see so much of like the full shape of the story and everything because it's like really just like straight from the head of Toriyama. That's like there's nothing in the Dragon Ball manga that is bad. There's just arcs that are somewhat inconsistent, and then eventually they just get really fucking good over and over and over again, and it's a great time.
And you will also see some of the best paneling in the history of comics. You will see the cleanest panels ever. I think the best fight choreography I've ever seen in a comic book, or a manga. It's just, Toriyama is a preternaturally gifted manga artist,
Yeah, so it is. Dragon Ball is just one of the best things out there, whatever form you experience it in. But the manga is the realest of the deals.
Yep. Sean, this was weirdly satisfying. I'm really happy we did this. I feel like kind of jazzed, like we finally put this down on paper. I feel great. Because I've never even done this for myself, just like do the random ranking. This is fun.
Yeah, no, talking about Dragon Ball is always fun. It's just one of the most fun media properties to talk about. It's like, because it's just got the most, like, don't give a fuck attitude about itself, and it's just about having fun. That, yes, anytime you can just do a Dragon Ball podcast is a good time. All
right. Well, thank you guys for listening to this part. Let's see what's next on our 10th anniversary adventure.
And also, eventually, we'll have to revisit this list, Jonathan, to fix this. Because really, none of these are Dragon Ball arcs. Really, what we should be listing are all the different Dragon Ball sagas.